Central to the prosecution's case is the timeline. It begins with what happened earlier in the day of the murders.
On that day, was a recital held for your niece, Sydney?
Yes, it was.
And when he greeted you and your sister Dominique and your parents, what was his demeanor?
He had a very far-away look. It was actually really kind of spooky. It was a frightening look.
So did you turn around and look at him during the time that he was sitting behind you?
Yeah, I talked to him.
Did he appear happy and cheerful?
No, not at all.
Mrs. Garvey, when you walked into the recital auditorium, did you see the defendant?
I did.
Did you notice anything unusual about him at that time?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
It was just, he was not the same as I had ever seen him before.
And how was he different? How is it that he was not the same?
I immediately noticed that it was a vast departure from the norm of how I've ever seen him before. He just seemed a little vacant, non-responsive. When he stared at me, I felt like he was looking right through me, and it scared me a little bit.
Nicole Brown and O.J. Simpson have a complicated relationship. They've been divorced for 2 years. They've dated other people. They have gone back and forth about getting back together. As they head to the recital, they are not together, except to see their daughter perform at a local middle school.
Every time I turned around, he was staring at Nicole.
When defense attorney Robert Shapiro cross-examines Denise Brown, he sets a trap.
Mr. Shapiro, I understand that you have a videotape that you want the court to view.
With the court's permission, we'd like to show a video of Mr. O.J. Simpson at the Paul Revere school, just leaving the recital, and ask if you can identify the people who are depicted in the tape that are relevant to this case. Would you please do that for us?
Sure.
Thank you. Now, there's somebody who is wearing looks like a blue shirt with dark hair, facing a gentleman who is O.J. Simpson. Do you know who that person is?
That's me.
And what were you just doing at that time?
I gave him a kiss goodbye.
And right to your right is a gentleman. Who is that?
That's my father.
And right to your left is another person.
That's my mother.
In this instance, the defense team is brilliantly confronting Denise Brown with something you could think of as a little bit of proof for their point. So she testified already that she saw O.J. Simpson with a spooky look on his face, a frightening look. He seemed far away to her, and the defense wants to contradict that. So they're taking this piece of evidence from the outside, bringing it before the jury, and letting them see the proof in the picture. To see the look on his face that doesn't look like someone who has a spooky look, a frightening look. He appears cheerful and happy, and he's seen picking up his child and kissing Denise Brown at one point. He's smiling right there.
I was at the dance recital that he was at that day because our daughters were in the same dance school. And as with the year before, I saw O.J. Simpson at the dance recital that day, and people would say, "Juice, how you doing? O.J., hey, how are you?" People loved him. They wanted his autograph. They wanted to take a picture with him. They wanted to shake his hand. They loved him.
Have you ever seen a video of Mr. Simpson shortly after this recital interacting with the Brown family and with his son, Justin?
I did.
And when you saw him at the end of that video there, he seemed to you to be kind and happy. Did he not?
Yes, he did.
Like he always does. Isn't that right?
That's right.
And when you saw this up in the DA's office on Friday, didn't you think, gee, that O.J. Simpson looked pretty kind and happy at that point? Didn't you think that?
Well, what I really thought was that was an amazing change.
Is that what you thought?
I really did.
Now, do you see that's the exact same date? You understand
I know, that's right. It amazes me.
Then the prosecution had a chance to do redirect examination and what we call rehabilitation in the courtroom, where they had a chance to have her clarify that when she said O.J. Simpson looked frightening and spooky, it was inside of the dance recital. This video was taken outside.
You just saw the defendant's demeanor in the videotape outside the recital. Is that correct?
Right.
Is that the way he appeared inside the recital? That is his demeanor?
No.
It was different inside?
Yes.
He told the jury they'd have evidence that he was ugly, in an ugly mood, and brooding. But look at the videotape. I think everybody has to pay attention. The videotape does not lie. I mean, it reminds me of Rodney King. I mean, you see certain things, and it's pretty graphic. And people can describe all they want. But when they're faced with what actually happened, I think it makes it pretty clear for these jurors.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, January 28th, 2021. So I have been told. This is our 10th study session on Jeffrey Toobin's The Run of His Life, The People versus O.J. Simpson. Man, amazing. That segment that we just heard, that is from the Court TV series OJ 25. It came out just last summer, and it is a 25-part installment that documents the trial. It doesn't really do a lot of the background information. Basically, the entire 25 installments are from day one of the trial to the conclusion. So I would highly encourage folks to check it out, especially if you didn't watch the trial or if you don't want to invest all the time to watch the trial. It is a great abridged assessment of what took place. You'll get to see all the key moments and get lots of background information about things that happened. So check it out. It's available online, and I think it's even on YouTube. But importantly, the segment that we just heard, that is, I believe, from the third installment in the series. Last week, I said Jeffrey Toobin, he is lying throughout this book. He wrote that Johnnie Cochran called Christopher Darden a nigger in the courtroom during their whole exchange about is nigger going to be said in the trial. Mr. Darden did not write about this. No one else included this in their book, and Mr. Darden's daughter wrote about this and said that she asked her dad, and he said explicitly it did not happen. So that's one. Two, last week he covered Denise Brown's testimony. That is one of Nicole Brown Simpson's sisters. She gave the testimony that you heard about O.J. Simpson was spooky looking. You know, he didn't look like the same O.J. Simpson. It was scary, you know, the way that he looked. Chilling. You know, and then they had Candace Garvey, one of Nicole Brown Simpson's white friends, also testified to the same thing. Wow. He just didn't look like the same person. He looked vacant, like he was looking right through me. Oh. Like, remember I said last week, Michael Brown Jr., the way that white people describe the frightening, terrorizing, raping black male, reckless eyeballing. I said that is a massive act of white supremacy racism lying to not include, oh, by the way, there was a video of what these white women are talking about so you can judge for yourself. Does he look chilling? Does he look frightening? You heard Jim Moret. That is a white man. He was a correspondent for the case and kind of gives his views throughout the Court TV segment. He said, hey, I was there. He looked like the same O.J. Simpson. Everyone wanted his autograph. He was affable. He was cheerful. I didn't hear anything about this white man. That, oh, yeah, he was spooky and vacant. Looked like he was about to kill everybody in the room right now. Didn't hear that at all. I would encourage you to check out the video where you can, you can see some of the exact white women who testified. Oh, yeah, he looked like a killer. Is that you in the video, Miss Brown, kissing O.J. Simpson? Oh, yeah, that's me. Is that your white father standing next to O.J. Simpson? Yes, that's correct. You heard the grandsister Johnnie L. Cochran Jr. at the conclusion at the press conference where he said, hey, we got video. People can judge for themselves. You can say whatever you want to. Believe your eyes. Does this look like some? Again, check out the segment. You can see this online. It is well worth it. And the main point for Jeffrey Toobin to not include a peep, not even a sentence that, oh yeah, there was video about this and these witnesses got asked about this video and the video seemed to contradict what they were saying, to totally ignore that and leave that out of the book. That is what I would expect from someone who is a master deceiver. If O.J. Simpson is guilty, then you don't have to lie. You don't have to omit any evidence. We can just, what is it, Judge Ito? We can just be about truth school. We can get all the evidence and come to a conclusion. White supremacists, racists, master deceivers, they don't do that. They lie and conceal and lie and conceal and lie and conceal, and we'll have more of that today. Jeffrey Toobin, the run of his life, the people versus O.J. Simpson, audio segment 1.
Chapter 16. I can't be here, Your Honor. In her opening statement, Marcia Clark had surprised Johnnie Cochran by declaring so emphatically that the murders had occurred at precisely 10:15 p.m. Talking with his colleagues on the defense team, Cochran learned from investigator Bill Pavlik that he had a witness who said she saw Simpson's Bronco outside his house at 10:15 p.m. That was Rosa Lopez, the maid at 348 North Rockingham, next door to O.J.'s house. Responding to Clark in his own opening statement, Cochran leaned heavily on Lopez's expected testimony, though he himself had never spoken to Lopez. Cochran made the point repeatedly that if the murder took place at 10:15 and the Bronco was still at Rockingham at 10:15, O.J. could not have done it. No one was more surprised to hear this than Rosa Lopez. From her base with the Salinger family just south of Simpson's estate, the 57-year-old maid followed the case closely on television, and even told several friends and family members in Los Angeles of her memories of the night in question. What Lopez told them, however, was that she had seen the Bronco at around 10 o'clock p.m., not 10:15. When Cochran said her name in his opening on January 25th, reporters quickly learned where she lived and began staking out her home. That was nerve-wracking enough for Lopez, but it was the disparity between her memories and Cochran's characterization of them that caused her real dread. As she well knew, a 10 o'clock sighting was neutral at best and incriminating at worst for O.J., because the murder scene was only a 5-minute drive from his house. Lopez had told several other maids in the neighborhood that she remembered seeing the Bronco at 10 o'clock. Word began circulating in the neighborhood that Rosa was lying, or had been paid off, or was otherwise enthralled to the defense camp. Lopez had also told her daughter, who lived in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, about seeing O.J.'s car at 10 o'clock. The reporters, the rumors, the scolding looks from her friends and family, they all combined to turn her misery to panic. The defense lawyers learned of Lopez's dismay, and as they did so often when confronted with a delicate task, turned to investigator Pat McKenna. Outgoing and friendly, McKenna was the obvious choice to mollify Lopez and keep her from fleeing before she could testify. He did what he could. McKenna and Cochran arranged for Lopez to have her own lawyer. Unappeased, Lopez quit her job with the Salingers on February 10th and went into hiding with her daughter in Los Feliz. The press found her there, and she called McKenna to help her escape. The next day, McKenna picked her up and led a fleet of local television vans on a brief 80-mile-per-hour chase through the streets of Los Angeles until he lost them. Still, Lopez fretted. A few days later, she disappeared altogether. She spent the night of Wednesday, February 22nd, in her car, and then drove aimlessly until she wound up in New Mexico. From there she called her lawyer, who on Cochran's behalf begged her to return. She agreed to fly back to L.A., but only, she said, for a single day. She would come to court on Friday, February 24th, but she vowed to leave for her native El Salvador the following morning. After nearly 30 years in the United States, she had decided to leave tomorrow. Lopez's flight from New Mexico landed in Los Angeles at 1:30 a.m. on February 24th, and when she appeared in court at 9 o'clock that morning, she looked haggard and bewildered. Seated in the back row of the courtroom, waiting to be called to the witness stand, she wore a purple velour jumpsuit and a dazed expression. Born and raised in rural El Salvador, Rosa Lopez led a life of extraordinary hardship until she came to the United States. One of 10 children, she dropped out of school at age 9 to help her parents harvest their small crop of corn, beans, and rice. She married young and had 7 children, but only 4 survived childbirth. 2 more died in the course of her country's long civil war, a 15-year-old daughter who was kidnapped and killed, and a son, a government pilot whose helicopter was shot down by guerrillas. The 2 survivors came with her to Los Angeles, where she had worked as a maid for about 30 years. Rosa Lopez brought a survivor's instincts to the witness stand in the Simpson case, as well as a considerable reservoir of street smarts. When Ito called Lopez to the witness stand, she revealed a quirky stage presence. Ito had called in a Spanish interpreter, but Lopez obviously understood all the English that was spoken around her. The purpose of the hearing this day was to allow Ito to decide whether he was going to interrupt the prosecution's case and allow Lopez to testify. Was she actually going to leave for El Salvador the following day? And if so, was she important enough for the defense to be allowed to call her as a witness out of the usual order? "Why were you living in another state over the course of the last several days?" Cochran asked Lopez during direct examination, which lasted only about 10 minutes. "Because the reporters won't leave me alone. I'm tired of looking at them. They have been harassing me." Lopez's style was cryptic, dismissive, and oddly grand. Lopez said she had reservations to fly to San Salvador on Saturday and hoped to be on her way. Rising to cross-examine, Darden first made sure of one point that Cochran had already covered. Lopez had said she had a reservation, but no ticket for the February 25th flight to San Salvador on TACA Airlines. "You just made the reservation, didn't you?" "Yes." "You made that today?" "Yes." "Prior to coming to court this morning?" "Yes." At that moment, Sherry Lewis, a prosecutor who was sitting next to Darden at their table, rose to go to the telephone in the courtroom. What she was doing was obvious, checking to see if Lopez really had made the reservation. Moments later, Darden had his answer. "Miss Lopez," he said, "we just called the airline. They don't show a reservation for you. Can you explain to the court why it is that you just told us you have a reservation?" No matter how many times she was contradicted by the facts, and this was the first of many, Lopez was never rattled. She serenely adjusted her story, but never her supercilious demeanor. "Because I am going to reserve it, sir. As soon as I leave here, I will buy my ticket and I will leave. If you want to, the cameras can follow me." Darden pursued her. "You lied to us, didn't you? Yes or no?" Because the agencies are closed. They open at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was brought here very early, sir." "You don't have any plans to leave Los Angeles at all, do you?" Suddenly Lopez answered in English. "Of course, sir. My bags are packed. Everything is ready." And so it went, for hour after hour. Lopez remained unflappable, even as her story crumbled around her. It turned out she had bought a round-trip ticket to El Salvador a few weeks earlier. She had looked into receiving unemployment benefits, not the act of someone planning to leave the United States permanently. She said she was anxious to see her ill sister in El Salvador, but she then admitted that they hadn't spoken in many weeks. The exchanges between Darden and Lopez sometimes had a surreal quality. "You've been here 27 years, correct?" Darden asked. "I came in 69. You figure it out." "Okay. Why don't you tell me how long you've been here?" "Let's say 34 years. Even Lopez's supposed loathing for the press seemed questionable. She had actually given several television interviews, including one with a Spanish-language station just a week earlier, when she had said nothing about wanting to flee the country. During one break in the testimony as she was leaving the courtroom, Lopez stopped to chat with Kristen Jeanette Myers, a reporter covering the trial for Court TV. Darden asked Lopez if she said, "I love you on TV," to Jeanette Myers. "Yes, because I see her on TV." "You weren't terrified of that TV reporter, were you?" "No, because she doesn't have a camera in front of my face." At the end of Lopez's long day of testimony, Ito gave the defense a break. He conceded that Lopez had contradicted herself any number of times, but he thought she was sincere in her determination to leave the country. Based on Cochran's representation that she would say she saw the Bronco at 10:15 p.m. on June 12th, Ito thought she was important enough to delay the trial. It was already after 5 o'clock p.m., but Ito ordered the bailiffs to bring the jurors from their hotel to the courtroom. Ito was ready to sit until midnight, if necessary. At 5:49 p.m., Marcia Clark stood at the podium, and her voice husky with emotion made a request. "I have informed the court that I cannot be present tonight because I do have to take care of my children, and I don't have anyone who can do that for me. And I do not want proceedings to go before a jury when I can't be here." She said she had thought that Ito was going to order Lopez's testimony for Monday, not this very day. Nearly crying, Clark added, "I can't be here, Your Honor." The situation placed Ito, in effect, squarely between two women, Rosa Lopez, who said she was planning on leaving the country the following day, and Marcia Clark, who had to care for her children. Ito backed Clark, putting off Lopez's testimony until Monday and betting that the maid could add one more weekend to the decades she had already lived in the United States. The judge called Lopez to the podium where the lawyers usually held forth. Ito said he would put her up in a hotel for the weekend. Elbows propped on the podium, Lopez wailed in English, "I don't want to be here any longer. All these reporters have destroyed my life." "Miss Lopez," the judge continued solicitously, "the planes fly, as you know, to El Salvador on a regular basis. I will start your case, your testimony in front of the jury, the first thing we do with the jury Monday at 9 o'clock. Suddenly, almost coquettish, Lopez said to the judge, "I will do it for you, Your Honor." Marcia Clark's problem was not so easily solved. She had been separated from her second husband, Gordon Clark, for a little more than a year. On June 9, 1994, just 3 days before the murders on Bundy Drive, she had filed for divorce. As the months passed, their relations grew more strained. Clark's sudden celebrity, combined with the extraordinary demands on her time generated by the Simpson case, increased the tensions between them. The events of February 24th were typical of their problems. Marcia and Gordon Clark had 2 boys, aged 3 and 5 at the time. According to the interim custody-sharing agreement they had worked out, Gordon would have the boys every other weekend, starting at 7 o'clock Fridays. 2 weeks earlier, Marcia had arranged for Gordon to pick up the kids at Marcia's home at 7. However, according to Marcia, the boys preferred for her to take them to Gordon's rather than for their father to pick them up. During the court day on February 24th, she had told Ito several times that she had to be home in time to take the kids to her husband's by 7. She lived in Glendale, not far from downtown, but when Ito shut down court shortly before 6, Clark barely had time to make the 7 o'clock limit. Gordon Clark wasn't watching the trial on February 24th. He made it a point never to watch. But when he found out what Marcia had said to Ito about her child care obligations, he and his lawyers were aghast. According to their understanding of the custody agreements, Gordon could easily have picked up the kids himself. In their view, Marcia was lying to the court to gain a tactical advantage for the prosecution. That is, additional time to prepare for cross-examination of Rosa Lopez, and public sympathy for herself as a working mother. Thus did a private, and alas, fairly typical divorce, become part of the communal narrative of the Simpson case, with, of course, the public nature of the dispute ratcheting up the rancor between the parties. Spurred by Garcetti's PR director, Suzanne Childs, the media took Marcia's side with a vengeance. The Clarks' divorce was promptly elevated to the cover of Newsweek, where the headline declared, "Marcia Clark fights for her kids. Are mothers penalized for working?" The stories inside included a full page of instructions to Gordon Clark, written by a New York book editor who had never met anyone in his family, about how he should behave during the divorce proceedings. Based on a single courtroom exchange and a few snatches of information from her divorce file, Marcia became an overnight female icon, the heroine of working women everywhere. There was some truth in this cardboard cutout portrayal of the prosecutor. However, real life was considerably more complicated, too. A young Russian émigré named Pinchas Kleks arrived on the shores of what was known as Palestine in 1918. At the beginning, he made his living delivering kerosene by donkey. From that modest start, Kleks came to open a gas station, and then he devoted his professional life to running a modest chain of service stations in what would become the nation of Israel. In 1930, Pinchas and his wife had a son, Abraham. A tall and strapping Sabra, Abraham Kleks came of age with the young nation. He graduated from high school and went straight into the Israeli army, where he served as a 17-year-old lieutenant in the War for Independence. Shortly after that war was won in 1948, Abraham decided to see the world a little and followed some friends to the University of California at Berkeley. At the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco, Abraham met and fell in love with a girl from Brooklyn. Abraham and Rosalind married, settled in the United States, and a year later, on August 31st, 1953, had their first child, Marcia. Abraham was promptly drafted into the U.S. Army for the Korean War. Thus began nearly 2 decades of extraordinarily peripatetic family life. Abraham had studied microbiology at Berkeley, and he pursued this interest in assignments at Army medical laboratories in Texas and later Washington State. From the Army, Abraham joined the Food and Drug Administration, where he moved up the career ladder with jobs across the nation. 5 years in Los Angeles, 4 near San Francisco, 1 in Detroit, 1 near Washington, D.C., and 2 in New York City. During that last tour, young Marcia completed her high school requirements at Susan Wagner High School in Staten Island. By this point, she also had a brother, Jonathan, 6 years her junior. Marcia was a quick-minded, good-natured girl with an extraordinary talent for languages. She mastered Spanish, and after just 2 months in Israel, one summer, gained a fluent command of Hebrew as well. Notwithstanding the frequent moves, or perhaps because of them, she became a great joiner of activities, cheerleading, school plays, and the like. Her home life was neither especially contentious nor highly religious. To her mother, at least, it seemed that they quarreled no more than most adolescent children and their parents. A rift between Marcia and her parents began when they moved from New York back to Los Angeles, their final relocation in 1970. The family bought a house in the San Fernando Valley, and Abraham served as the district director of the FDA until he retired in 1985, while Rosalind worked for a county supervisor. Marcia had little to do in that first year back west. The local high schools required a year's residency before they would give her a degree, but she had already fulfilled all her course requirements. Marcia wanted badly to get out of the house, but she couldn't go to college without a high school degree. Amid the tension at home and frustration about school, Marcia developed bulimia, an affliction she would battle on and off for more than 20 years. At last, Marcia escaped to UCLA. She was still an undergraduate when she met her first husband, a dashing and handsome young man, Gabby Horowitz, like her father, an immigrant from Israel. As Gabby used to tell the story, he was driving his Mercedes around the campus when he saw this gorgeous woman, Marcia, and decided then and there he had to meet her. The courtship was brief but intense, and they married shortly after she graduated, without even telling Marcia's parents first. Gabby Horowitz made his living as a professional backgammon player, while Marcia started law school. The late 1970s were boom years for the game, and for a while Horowitz thrived in the epicenter of the craze. He played occasionally at Pips, a glitzy club founded by Hugh Hefner, and frequented by many modest celebrities of the era, including, now and then, O.J. Simpson. But mostly Horowitz frequented the Cavendish West, a haven for serious backgammon and bridge players on the Sunset Strip. And Marcia Horowitz became an unlikely regular at the Cavendish, too. She rarely played the game, and instead studied her law books at unoccupied gaming tables. She was around all the time, a quiet girl, Buddy Burke, a Cavendish regular, said later. She was attractive, she was sweet, always very cordial, a lot better with the social graces than Gabby was. Gabby was, in fact, a controversial figure in the backgammon world. According to Danny Kleinman, who self-publishes books about backgammon and bridge in Los Angeles, Gabby was a fine player, but more importantly, a flashy, spectacular player. He looked like Jean-Claude Van Damme, about 6'3", and he kept himself in good shape. He was a health food nut. He was a very good player, but he used to cheat. In one case, I saw him move pieces on the board when his opponent's head was turned. I walked out of the club with him and asked why he had done it. He gave me his rationale. He said he was a much better player than his opponent, and the only way he might lose was through luck. So he felt he had a right to win and a right to cheat. Though Marcia was often present at the club, no one ever suspected her of being involved in Gabby's cheating. Everything that I know about Marcia is that she was honest and straightforward, Kleinman said. Marcia prodded Gabby to develop a career interest beyond backgammon, and he decided to learn about real estate. He didn't have much confidence in his English in a professional setting, so a friend of his, a backgammon-playing dentist named Bruce Roman, asked Gabby to join him at Scientology meetings. Marcia never joined the church herself, but she did tag along with Gabby and Bruce on occasion. In 1979, she told her parents she was divorcing Gabby. About a month later, she announced she was marrying Gordon Clark, whom she had met at the Scientology meetings. At 22, he was 5 years her junior and an administrator with the Church of Scientology in Los Angeles. Bruce Roman, who was also a lay minister in the church, performed their Scientology wedding ceremony. Marcia didn't invite her parents to that wedding either. Gabby's fortunes went south with the end of both his marriage and the backgammon craze. According to Kleinman, his cheating became much more extensive and elaborate. He used a variety of methods: manipulation of dice, magnetic dice, electromagnetic boards. In the spring of 1989, Gabby Horowitz was accidentally shot in the head while he and a friend were examining a gun. In a bizarre coincidence, the friend was Bruce Roman. In the investigation of the shooting, which ended without any charges being filed, Roman's lawyer was Robert Shapiro. Several people who have seen Gabby Horowitz since his accident say he can no longer walk or talk. Shortly before the Simpson trial, Horowitz moved to Israel. The Cavendish did not prosper either. In 1987, the police raided it as part of an investigation for illegal gambling. However, no charges were ever filed against its owner, who was also represented by Robert Shapiro. Nevertheless, the club closed for good in 1994. The years Marcia and Gordon Clark lived together were the time that Marcia came of age as a prosecutor. Gordon stopped working for the Church of Scientology, returned to college, and became a modestly successful computer programmer. They had 2 sons. One day, a few years before the Simpson case, Marcia's grandfather, Pinchas Klex, who was visiting from Israel, spent an afternoon on a spectator bench in one of Marcia's trials. Though he spoke little English and thus could not understand precisely what was going on, the experience of watching Marcia in court ranked as one of the great thrills of Pinchas's long life. At the end of 1993, a few months after her 40th birthday, Marcia Clark made several dramatic changes in her life. She told Bill Hodgman that she didn't like her administrative job and wanted to return to the courtroom, even if it meant a cut in pay. In December, during a long drive north to the Bay Area to visit friends, Marcia told Gordon that she wanted a divorce. To both Gordon and her parents, she was cryptic about her reasons. "He's not for me," she told her father in Hebrew. And then about a month after she split with Gordon, Marcia told her parents that she never wanted to speak to them again. She said they had been icy and unsupportive, and she wanted nothing more to do with them. At just about the same time, Jonathan Klex, an engineer in Northern California, told his parents that he too wished never to speak to them again. The Klex were thunderstruck, heartbroken. They had become very close to Marcia and Gordon's older child, who was 4 at the time his parents separated. They had less of a chance to know the Clarks' second boy, who was just a baby. They figured the crisis, whatever its mysterious origin, would blow over. It never did. Abraham took to making surreptitious visits to the older boy's nursery school to spend a little time with him. Once he brought Rosalind with him. When Marcia learned of it, she denounced the school director in front of a room full of people. Abraham called Marcia to tell her that her mother was undergoing major surgery in September 1994, the time of jury selection in the Simpson case. Marcia never called back. Gordon was shocked and bitter about the separation. When the Simpson trial began, Marcia's sudden celebrity gave Gordon the opportunity to take a very public form of revenge. By coincidence, on February 24th, the same day Marcia said she had to leave court during Rosa Lopez's testimony, Gordon filed a motion in their divorce case to change their custody arrangements. The actual adjustment he sought was rather minor and reasonable, increased visitation while Marcia was working late on the case. But in his accompanying affidavit, Gordon portrayed Marcia as a workaholic and a neglectful parent. "I have personal knowledge that on most nights she does not arrive home until 10 p.m., and even when she is home, she is working," Gordon wrote in the document, which his lawyers knew would quickly become public. In contrast to Marcia, Gordon said he always made it home by 6:15 p.m. While I commend Marcia's brilliance, her legal ability, and her tremendous competence as an attorney, I do not want our children to suffer because she is never home and never has any time to be with them. It was this affidavit, made public just after she said she had to leave court to be with her children during Lopez's testimony, that made Marcia's personal life a matter of public controversy. Professionally powerful, Marcia was personally fragile. Gordon thought she drank too much. She smoked more than she wanted to, long greedy pulls on strong European cigarettes. The years of bulimia had exacted a painful price. Extreme tooth decay is a common side effect of bulimia, and in her original divorce petition with Gordon, Marcia said, "Within the last 2 years I have suffered a medical/dental catastrophe for which I initially borrowed $16,000, $14,000 of which is still unpaid. In addition, it was necessary to withdraw $26,000 from my pension plan in order to finish my dental work. Money stresses compounded the ugliness of the divorce. At the time of their separation, Gordon's earnings amounted to a little more than half of Marcia's $96,829 yearly salary, so he could not be counted on for major support. The shattered relationship with her parents caused Marcia additional worry. She knew that her parents were actually supporting their son-in-law's efforts to obtain more time with their grandchildren. Since the spring of 1994, all of the Kleck's contact with the children had been through Gordon. An acute student of public relations, Marcia knew that a public disavowal by her own parents would greatly compromise her image as a heroic working mother. Throughout the trial, in addition to all her other anxieties, she feared above all a public denunciation from her parents. At times, the compounded stresses of ending a long marriage, trying the Simpson case, and enduring the indignities of unsought celebrity nearly drove Clark to the breaking point. At the supermarket one day, as she bought some Tampax, the grocery bagger quipped, "I guess the defense is really in for it this week." At another time, during Denise Brown's testimony, the National Enquirer published topless photographs of Clark from when she had been on vacation years earlier with Gabby Horowitz. She was so humiliated that one day she actually began sobbing quietly at the counsel table in Judge Ito's court. She scribbled a note to Scott Gordon, the prosecutor who was seated next to her. "I'm losing it," Clark wrote. Darden noticed her distress and subtly shifted his position so that the courtroom camera would be directed away from Marcia. Thinking fast, the roly-poly Gordon jotted Clark a response. The Enquirer was going to run the same pictures of me, but Greenpeace wouldn't let them do it. Clark smiled, and that crisis, at least, passed unnoticed by the public. Judge Ito had seriously considered ordering Rosa Lopez to jail for the weekend before she was to testify. Ultimately, however, the judge accepted her promise that she would appear on Monday, so he directed that the county put her up at a downtown hotel, the Checkers. Fearful of more surprises, Johnnie Cochran directed Pat McKenna to book the room next to hers and never let the housekeeper out of his sight until she appeared for court on February 27th. They made an unlikely pair, the tiny El Salvadoran woman and the big, bluff Irishman, yet they became fast friends after a fashion. McKenna would try to buy Lopez some food or a drink, but Rosa seemed scarcely to eat and never drank a thing. Trying to think of something that might cheer her up, McKenna remembered her room at the Salinger's house. Like many Latin American women of her generation, Lopez liked to keep a little shrine of small candles, known as veladoras, on her dresser. McKenna had learned his Catholicism in Chicago, so he was unfamiliar with the custom. Still, just before they were to return to court, the investigator decided to improvise a gift to his charge. He went to a local drugstore and bought Rosa a few candles that she might use for her worship. Deeply touched, she invited McKenna to join her in prayer. A little rusty in this department, the investigator agreed to keep Rosa company and have a drink from the minibar while she prayed to God. Unfortunately, the candles McKenna had bought were somewhat larger than the usual veladoras. After a few moments of her devotions, the smoke detector in Lopez's room went off. Rosa began crying. McKenna tried smothering the candles and covering the smoke detector with a laundry bag. Nothing worked. Their problems were compounded because this was the week of the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles, and the Checkers served as the unofficial headquarters of the country music contingent. The alarm wouldn't stop ringing, so in a few moments the lobby of the hotel was packed with evacuees, mostly women in big hair, men in cowboy boots, and Rosa Lopez and Pat McKenna. The comedy of errors grew worse when court convened on Monday morning. Marcia Clark opened the session with a passionate appeal for Lopez's testimony to be taken on videotape, not in front of the jury. The defense would play it later if it chose to do so. That way, defense evidence would not be deposited right in the middle of the government's case. Ito agreed, Cochran, for his part, accused Clark of staging her child care crisis of the previous Friday so she could re-argue the issue of Lopez's testimony. In response, Clark rose in righteous indignation. "I'm offended as a woman, as a single parent, and as a prosecutor, and an officer of the court to hear an argument posed by counsel like that of Mr. Cochran today," she said. "Some of us have child care issues, and they are serious and they are paramount. Obviously, Mr. Cochran cannot understand that, but he should not come before this court and impugn the integrity of someone who does have those considerations." It was that sort of telegenic, off-the-cuff eloquence that made Clark so impressive in court, even if, as was the case here, Cochran may have been right on the merits. Ito sent the jury back to the hotel and ordered that a video camera be brought into court to record Lopez's testimony. Then he had to ask for a new interpreter because several television viewers had called or written and said that the woman on Friday had used a Mexican dialect rather than El Salvadoran. Then the defense admitted it had found a statement that investigator Bill Pavlik had taken from Lopez shortly after the murders. This was the kind of late disclosure that had caused such a tumult during opening statements. Clark had a chance to vent some more outrage on this score, and it wasn't until the middle of the afternoon that Rosa Lopez returned to the witness stand. She wore a new purple dress with a beaded collar and shiny black pumps. They had come as gifts from a defense team supporter in Las Vegas, who used to call McKenna now and then. Questioning her through her now appropriately Central American interpreter, Cochran finally began walking Lopez through the events of June 12, 1994. At one point, Cochran put up a map of the area around Rockingham on the video monitor next to the witness stand. Amid all her recent moves, Lopez had lost her eyeglasses. Cochran began canvassing the courtroom for glasses. "How about somebody near her age?" Cochran quipped. "I'm looking for Mr. Bailey." After sampling several pairs, Lopez narrowed her choices to Bailey's aviator model and a bright green pair donated by a spectator. For several long minutes, Lopez, Cochran, Bailey, and the interpreter were all huddled around the witness stand, giving it the look of the stateroom scene in A Night at the Opera. When Lopez reached the critical moment in her testimony, what she saw at around 10 o'clock on the night of the murders, she hedged. She said she took her dog for a walk and saw O.J.'s Bronco sometime after 10 o'clock, but it clearly could have been anywhere from 2 to 15 minutes after the hour. What was clear from the outset, then, was that Rosa Lopez was simply not a very important witness. She didn't help or hurt either side very much, yet because of her, Ito had allowed the trial to come to a crashing halt. At the end of the day, Cochran confessed that the defense team had found another previous statement by Lopez, this one a taped interview with Pavlik. Ito devoted the bulk of the following day to a hearing on why the defense had failed to turn this statement over to the prosecution. The answer, it became clear, was that chaos had reigned while the case was in Shapiro's hands, and no one knew where anything was. Shapiro did not even attend an important conference in Ito's chamber on this subject on Tuesday. He remained in the courtroom to chat with Barbara Walters. Ito finally resumed Lopez's testimony late Tuesday afternoon, saying, "We will finish the questioning by Mr. Cochran, and then I'll order you to come back on Thursday to complete this." But the housekeeper, recognizing her newfound clout, decided she was through for the day. She informed Ito in English, "I am very tired. I want to go rest, sir. I don't want any more questions. Thank you." And then she just walked out the courtroom door. Ito appeared incapable of putting the Lopez issue to rest. The judge devoted all of Wednesday, March 1st, to the subject of sanctions on the defense for its failure to turn over Lopez's previous statements. One after another, Douglas, Ullman, and Shapiro offered their apologies, which Clark spurned with acid contempt. Ito ultimately imposed some modest fines on the lawyers and told the jury, in a rather convoluted way, that the defense had misbehaved. On Thursday, Lopez finally returned to the stand, and she completed her testimony on Friday, her sing-song voice saying, "No me recuerdo," I don't remember, and references to Cochran as Mr. Johnnie briefly became national touchstones. Darden made many points in his cross-examination, but it too wandered all over the map. From the important, Lopez admitted she had never really looked at a clock on June 12th, to such irrelevancies as her taste in food. I love tamales. In the end, the jurors did not return to the courtroom until Monday, March 6th, 9 days after they had last heard testimony. The Lopez interlude amounted to another example of the prosecution's bad luck and the defense's good fortune. Cochran had been livid when Ito ruled that Lopez's testimony would not be presented live to the jury. But if the jurors had been present, they would have seen this witness implode on cross-examination. As a result of this defense loss, Cochran could decide later whether he wanted to show the tape of her testimony to the jury. In a characteristic show of defense team harmony, Shapiro told reporters after Lopez stepped down that the defense would decide later whether the jury would see her testimony. That same night, F. Lee Bailey went on Larry King Live to declare that the defense would definitely be playing the Lopez tape to the jury. Ultimately, of course, the defense would decide not to play the tape. The real loser in the Lopez episode was Lance Ito. The handling of Lopez's testimony represented an appalling piece of judicial mismanagement. At great expense to Los Angeles County, Ito forced the sequestered jurors to sit in their hotel for all that time, just so the defense could call a witness who didn't help either side very much. Not once over those 9 days did the judge hurry the lawyers along. As so often happened in moments of stress for the judge, he simply froze. When her testimony concluded, Rosa Lopez did indeed return to her remote town of Sensatepique, El Salvador. There was one fitting postscript. In April 1995, a comedian from Baltimore named Mike Gabriel traveled to El Salvador hoping on a lark to meet Rosa. He managed to find her, and they took a few photographs together. When Gabriel, who performs as a sensei mystic teaching yoga to cats, returned to the States, he announced that he and Rosa were engaged to be married. The hoax succeeded beyond Gabriel's greatest hopes. For many months, the pending nuptials were reported deadpan in any number of newspaper reports, magazines, and television shows. Rosa Lopez, still single, has never returned to the United States. Chapter 17. In the past 10 years, Detective Furman. After the conclusion of Detective Lang's long-delayed testimony just before lunch on March 9th, the trial reached a critical juncture. "The people call Detective Mark Furman," said Marcia Clark. Neither side made even a pretense of treating Furman as just another witness. His arrival was timed with military precision. Before most witnesses in the trial were summoned to Ito's courtroom, they waited in the 9th floor hallway, chatting nervously with passerby. Not Furman. The DA's office had gone to extraordinary lengths to insulate him from any unplanned encounters. Unlike any other witness in the case, Furman came down from the district attorney's headquarters on the 18th floor on the freight elevator, the same one used by the jurors. Even the prosecutors crammed into the passenger elevators along with all the other courthouse denizens, but the DA's office didn't want to take that chance with Furman. And unlike other witnesses, Furman walked into court surrounded by a quartet of beefy bodyguards, investigators assigned to the district attorney. Clark's examination promptly bore out the metaphor implicit in Furman's arrival. She and her office were protecting him. In the flesh, Mark Furman was an imposing figure, a muscular 6'3", the first man in the courtroom who appeared a physical match for the defendant. He fit perfectly into his blue suit, and his white shirt and red print tie made a handsome match to his freshly cut dirty blonde hair. The room perked up when Furman walked in, and even O.J. Simpson looked a touch startled by the detective's commanding physical presence. Marcia Clark stepped to the podium, cocked her head to one side, and asked her first question as if it had just popped into her head. It was, in fact, carefully planned. "Detective Furman, can you tell us how you feel about testifying today?" "Nervous," Furman said, not at all nervously. "Okay," Clark prompted. "Reluctant?" Furman continued. "Can you tell us why?" she asked. "Throughout, since June 13th, it seems that I have seen a lot of the evidence ignored, and a lot of personal issues come to the forefront. I think that is too bad." "Okay," Clark said. "Heard a lot about yourself in the press, have you?" "Daily," Furman said gravely. "In light of that fact, sir, you have indicated that you feel nervous about testifying," Clark went on. "Have you gone over your testimony in the presence of several district attorneys in order to prepare yourself for court and the allegations that you may hear from the defense?" "Yes." Clark asked if this preparation session concerned the events at Bundy and Rockingham. "No," said Furman. "It dealt with side issues, sir?" "Yes, it was. It seems that the issues we were concerned with weren't evidentiary in nature or about the crime, mostly of a personal nature." Clark paused, soaking up the answers from her witness, and then turned to her pad and the beginning of the conventional portion of her direct examination. "Can you tell us how you are employed right now?" Seen on its own terms, Clark's unorthodox introduction of Furman to the jury succeeded. Under her sympathetic questioning, Mark Furman presented himself as an earnest civil servant who tried to do his job in the face of unwarranted and irrelevant personal attacks. Clark's message to the jury could not have been clearer. Here before you is a good man. Seen in retrospect, indeed, even in light of what Clark knew at the time, her examination of Furman stands as her biggest miscalculation of the trial. This critical set piece in the Simpson trial, the testimony of Mark Furman, represented another illustration in microcosm of why the trial ended the way it did. The prosecution's arrogance led it to disaster. The defense's obsession with race led it to victory. There was no mystery in the nature of the defense's line of attack on Furman. More than 7 months before he took the stand, my story in the New Yorker had shown that the defense would attempt to portray the detective as first and foremost a racist, but also, more speculatively, as the man who had planted the right-hand glove on Simpson's property. But that story was only the beginning. As often happened in the Simpson case, a disclosure in the media flushed out additional people with similar stories to tell. In the case of Mark Furman, my story provoked several people to come forward with tales of his racist behavior, a reaction that should have served as a warning to the prosecution. After an incendiary defense hit the newsstands on Monday, July 18, 1994, one person who saw a television report about it was Kathleen Bell. The report so startled her that she was moved to write a letter to Simpson's attorneys. "I'm writing to you in regards to a story I saw in the news last night," Bell wrote to Johnnie Cochran on July 19, 1994. "I thought it was ridiculous that the Simpson defense team would even suggest that there might be racial motivation in the trial against Mr. Simpson. I then glanced up at the television and was quite shocked to see that Officer Furman was a man that I had the misfortune of meeting. You may have received a message from your answering service last night that I called to say that Mr. Furman may be more of a racist than you can even imagine." Bell went on to write that she had worked as a real estate agent in Redondo Beach in 1985 and 1986. Her office was above a Marine recruiting station where Furman sometimes visited friends. I remember him distinctly because of his height and build, Bell wrote. Talking about his police work one day, Officer Furman said that when he sees a nigger, as he called it, driving with a white woman, he would pull them over. I asked, would if, sick, he didn't have a reason, and he said that he would find one. I looked at the two Marines to see if they knew he was joking, but it became obvious to me that he was very serious. Officer Furman went on to say that he would like nothing more than to see all niggers gathered together and killed. He said something about burning them or bombing them. I was too shaken to remember the exact words he used. Bell gave Cochran her name and number, and her story surfaced in the news media as well, several months before the trial began. On that same day, July 19th, 1994, a deputy district attorney named Lucienne Coleman was going about her business in the criminal courts building when she happened to run into LAPD detective Andy Purdy. Having seen the same reports Bell had seen, Coleman mentioned in passing that she thought it was absurd that the defense was alleging Furman had planted evidence. "I don't think it's ridiculous at all," Purdy answered. "I wouldn't put it past him." Purdy went on to say that shortly after he married a Jewish woman a few years before, Furman had painted swastikas on Purdy's locker. A few weeks after receiving this news, Coleman ran into some other officers who said they had heard Furman making remarks about Nicole Brown Simpson's boob job. Coleman did the responsible thing. In early August 1994, she brought these remarks to the attention of Marcia Clark and Bill Hodgman. Coleman had once been among Clark's closest friends in the office. The two women and their husbands had socialized together for several years. But as often happens in divorces, the Clark's friends had taken sides in their divorce, and Lucienne had taken Gordon's. That inevitably cooled her relationship with Marcia. So Lucienne Coleman was a messenger Clark was only too pleased to shoot. "This is bullshit," Clark cried when Coleman mentioned the reports about Furman. "This is bullshit being put out by the defense." Hodgman reacted less passionately, but he also appeared to pay Coleman's report little mind. Clark told Coleman to take her complaints to the LAPD's Internal Affairs Division. In fact, Furman's reputation was such that it almost reached into my own family. On the Friday after my story about Furman came out, my wife called me from her office at the large corporation in Manhattan where she worked. One of her colleagues, a young African-American business school graduate named Jarvis Bowers, had noticed the publicity about my story and sought advice about reporters who were now calling him about his link to Furman. Jarvis had grown up in Los Angeles, and one day in 1984, when he was 18, he and his father had gone to a movie in Westwood. Officer Mark Furman stopped Jarvis for jaywalking, put him in a chokehold, and threatened to kill him. Bowers was so outraged that he filed an official complaint against Furman, which was sustained. The officer was docked 1 day's pay. Clearly, then, there was not just smoke but fire in Furman's past. Clark, though, had her own method of determining whether Furman was telling the truth. She simply asked him about the charges. He confessed that the psychiatric reports revealed in the New Yorker were genuine, but he said those problems were long in the past. Kathleen Bell? A liar. Swastikas? Never happened. Furman even had an impressive character witness within the district attorney's office. In recent years, the detective had worked closely with a prosecutor based in Santa Monica named Danette Myers, a black woman. Furman had actually called Myers to warn her that the New Yorker story was coming out and to make the case that he was a changed man. Myers told the Simpson prosecutors that Mark Furman had never showed her the slightest hint of racism, and she gave him high marks as a detective and as a person. There were several ways the prosecution could have taken the middle ground with respect to Mark Furman. Clark could simply have avoided calling him. She could have introduced the glove found at Rockingham through Lang or Van Adder, who had both seen it in its untouched state on the path behind Kalen's room. That strategy would have prompted some mockery from the defense. They're hiding him. But such criticism wouldn't have amounted to much, because Simpson's attorneys could always have called Furman themselves. Similarly, Clark could have called Furman, but shown the jury, through both verbal and nonverbal signals, that the prosecution was not embracing the detective. A brief, chilly direct examination would have sufficed. But it was not in Marcia Clark's nature to equivocate. It was, after all, her job to tell the good guys from the bad guys, and she had no doubts about her ability to do it. Faced with a problematic witness like Furman, many prosecutors would insist at a minimum that he undergo many hours of grueling mock cross-examination. Such an approach both tests the witness's veracity and prepares him for what is to come. Clark and her team decided not to bother. Their preparation amounted to about half an hour of Furman fielding questions while he ate a sandwich. He spent much of the time complaining about the press. The prosecutors commiserated. They stood by their man.
Context of White Supremacy. Jeff, man, the grandcestor, Johnnie L. Cochran Jr., he called Jeffrey Toobin a liar. Repeatedly. Says so in his book and did so in interviews. Mr. Fuller recommends not name-calling and, don't even call people liars, white or non-white. You can just say, the person is lying or is not being truthful, but do not call them even a liar. And generally, I think most people observe that because I don't too often hear that. I mean, some people just do a lot of name-calling, but generally don't say such and such as a liar. They will verb lying or lied at this point. Jeffrey Toobin is doing a lot of lying. Even where we just ended about Mark Furman, like, ooh-wee. This is one where reading is more important than watching television, because if you read triangulating, they call it, if you read different sources, it can become easier to spot deception. Wowee. The number is 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 #. Press *61 if you would like to participate. I could start with a lot of other sources. We will start with Mark Furman, murder in Brentwood. What does he have to say? Mr. Furman. Let's see. After my first day of testimony was over, Marcia and I walked together to the elevator. Standing at the closed doors, Marcia turned to me and smiled. "You're one of the best I've ever seen," she said. I didn't know what to say other than thank you. I was a little embarrassed. I was just proud that I had been able to do a good job for the prosecution. The prosecution now considered me a star witness, while the defense now considered me a prime target. The defense had barely been aware of me until my testimony at the preliminary hearing. My name wasn't on the search warrant, and I was not in charge of the case. But I believe that once the defense lost their motion to suppress, largely because of my testimony, I became a target. The fact that the hearing was on television didn't really hit me until I returned to the West LA station. As I walked up to my desk, Ron Phillips smiled and said, "I should give you a big kiss." "What's up?" I asked. Ron told me that ever since my testimony that afternoon, the phone had been ringing off the hook with positive comments and reactions. I thought he was pulling my leg. Then other detectives jumped in, describing some of the calls they had taken. I was shocked at the compliments. That's what a detective is supposed to be. LAPD should be proud of Furman. That is the second time I've heard that today. Second time, second person who said that exact sentence. LAPD should be proud of Mark Furman. What a cop. I thought this would all pass by the next day. Boy, was I wrong. We'll pause right there. Actually, I'll skip down. Let's do one more Mark Furman. The prosecution lost the Simpson case for two reasons. As we have already seen, the prosecution team did not argue all the evidence they had. He talks about Jill Shively and all that too. The other reason they lost is that they didn't have an effective strategy for countering the defense's race card. In fact, not only did they not counter these bogus tactics, but in some cases, the prosecutors joined in, creating racial controversy themselves. By the time Marcia Clark, Chris Darden, Sherry Lewis, and I began working together in earnest, the preliminary hearing was over. Many racial issues had arisen about me. The defense had spun the planted glove theory, and we all knew that I would be the defense's primary target. Still, I thought that the prosecution would like to keep the trial focused on the evidence instead of a sideshow. As it turned out, the prosecution never had a clear strategy from the beginning. They should have appealed to Judge Ito's decision to allow racial issues and the use of the N-word into the case. Marcia Clark actually agrees with him there. And throughout the trial, they should have fought hard to convict O.J. Simpson instead of caving in on racial issues. Personally, I got along with everyone on the team, and they treated me with friendship and respect. Chris Darden is the only member of the prosecution team who has admitted that he harbored anything other than a professional attitude toward me during this time. Chris let his personal emotions enter this case in too many places and times. It wasn't professional. He wasn't a team player. As he wrote in his book, In Contempt, about our initial meeting, I didn't like him from the first time I saw him. I looked at him sitting in Scott Gordon's office waiting for me, and I had the urge to run. Whew, gotta follow those instincts sometime. Chris was an hour and a half late, of course, CPT, for our meeting, but that didn't bother him. As he said in his book, I didn't give a shit. Chris Darden is a brooding, confused man. He is a hothead, immature, and not in the least bit organized. He didn't seem concerned with the case, or if he was, he did a good job of hiding it. He pouted constantly, and when things didn't go well, he seemed to feel persecuted. He is obsessed with race, and throughout the trial, he appeared more concerned about his image in the black community than his effectiveness as a prosecutor. Chris was acutely sensitive to any criticism, especially when it came from other blacks. Where the hell were these people when the LAPD was vilifying me, calling me too black and too militant, he said to People magazine. Am I supposed to have surrendered my skin color just because I'm doing my job? I'll tell you, when this case is over, the families of black victims will be asking for me. Darden often saw himself as a black man first and a prosecutor second. In the following quote from his book, he discusses his ambivalence about accepting the district attorney's offer to join the prosecution team. Still, I was torn. I think I read all that. This statement illustrates the problems that Chris brought to the case: the racial hypersensitivity, callousness, and inability to make up his mind, and amnesia about his oath as a prosecutor. What if I arrived at a homicide scene which appeared to be the murder of a black man by a white man and said that I was not sure I wanted to investigate this case since I was torn between my responsibilities as a homicide detective and my responsibilities as a white man, I would be justifiably criticized, if not run off the force. I will stop there. Let's see. I'll give you one more. This is the great Mark Fuhrman. Let's see. Okay, so this is him responding to accusations that he planted evidence and responding to our author. It was a ludicrous charge. There was not a shred of evidence that I could have done anything like planting the glove. In fact, it could be proved there was no way I could have done so, but the defense would never even try to prove their planted glove theory. Instead, they would try to smear me as the type of man who would be willing to plant evidence. The first weapon they would use, and which Toobin used in his article in the New Yorker, would be carefully chosen excerpts from an application for a disability pension I filed in the early 1980s. The Jeffrey Toobin I know is a person I've seen on talk shows and a writer whose articles and book I have read. He seems to be articulate and intelligent, and he truly believes that O.J. Simpson murdered 2 people. But he was too torn by his connections to the defense team to come out and say so until well after the trial. Toobin might have thought of himself as an independent, objective journalist, but in effect he was a stooge for the defense. He took the defense's position from the beginning, and then, after doing enormous damage to the truth, slowly tried to slither back into the prosecution camp. As the first media purveyor of the planted glove theory, I have to wonder, did Toobin believe it? No. Did he compromise himself by reporting it? Yes. Did he wish that he hadn't? I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt and say yes. Still, Toobin was the messenger of the absurd defense claims. But if Toobin hadn't been the messenger, the defense would have found some other journalist looking for a scoop. Mark Fuhrman. We'll stop there and we'll do Christopher Darden in contempt, since Darden does quote a little bit of that. Let's see. Okay, so he writes a little bit about Fuhrman. He says, I heard back that Fuhrman was an unrepentant asshole, uptight, and arrogant. Hell, he was a cop. To some cops, asshole is a compliment. Nobody had anything bad to say about him. The black cops who worked with him now couldn't believe he was a racist. They had never seen any indication of that. He was that way 10, 11, 12 years ago, the black officer said. He'd gone through a transformation since then, a drastic change. He was a good man now, they said. A drastic change. Could a man like Fuhrman change? Could an outright racist see the light? Malcolm X had, at home, I reached for a worn paperback copy of Malcolm's autobiography when he made his pilgrimage to Mecca. Malcolm X discovered that there were all types of Muslims, black, brown, and white. He discovered that the white devils whom he blamed for the world's evil could also be worthy servants of Allah. But that was Malcolm X, one of the most respected men of his time and one of my teenage heroes. His racism had been forged by generations of oppression and bigotry. His change was testimony to his own forgiving nature and grace, as if he were saying to whites, I no longer hate you for what you've done. But could someone like Mark Fuhrman change? And even if he did, wasn't the result different because the source of his racism was different. One was reactive, the other proactive. Effect and cause. Furman's change would be like saying, I no longer hate you for what you are. Could Mark Furman change? I sure as hell hope so, because in a couple of days, I was going to be connected forever to him. Oh, let's see. I did not plan to read this, but this is the section that Mr. Furman just quoted, so I guess I'll give full context here. So he says, I didn't like him from the first time I saw him. I looked at him sitting in Scott Gordon's office waiting for me, and I had the urge to run again. We were set to meet at 1:30 that afternoon, but as usual, there were a million brush fires. Apparently, I said to Runyon, I'm the only one with a hose long enough to put them out. Phallic? Yeah. And so Mark Furman had to wait until about 3 p.m. when I came into Gordon's office and introduced myself. Furman didn't like to wait, and he was in a lousy mood. I didn't give a shit. On this case, everyone waited. Gordon seemed to like Furman. Scott was an ex-cop himself, and his office was filled with police mementos, especially from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Scott loved all things Canadian being Toronto, especially his wife Lisa. I didn't screw around. What will you tell the jury if the defense asks if you used the N-word? Mark Furman was huge, over 6 feet, 2 inches, and 200 pounds, a one-time bodybuilder with shoulders that easily covered the back of his chair. I'm not going to say that I never used a racial slur, he said. Under what circumstances have you used them? I don't know, he said. I guess when I'm incensed about something. Like what? Like traffic, I guess. Never on the job. I asked about his sports heroes, and he listed George Foreman, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. He knew some interracial couples and had black friends, he said. It was a short interview, and he seemed glad when it was over. I said I would talk to him again when I had more time, but I had one more question. Any skeletons that we don't know about? Anything that's going to bite us in the ass? He talked about the things we knew, which were bad enough, but assured us that was it. Afterward, Scott was pleased. See, he said, the guy wasn't so bad. I disagreed. I felt completely uncomfortable with him. There was something eerie about the guy. It was as if he'd been playing with me, coy on some answers, evasive on others. The wisdom of psychopaths. That book is, ever since I knew Mark Furman was coming to this, The Wisdom of Psychopaths. Evasive in answering questions. I watched all the other deputy DAs smile and agree that he would make a very good witness. But I was sick. There was something about this guy. I still plan to go right at him in direct examination to almost treat him as a hostile witness, but first I had to deal with the issues of admissibility of his racist slurs. And I will stop that. Oh, wait a minute. That wasn't what I planned to read. So what I planned to read, let's see. So they're divvying out who is going to take which witnesses, right? And so they're going through the team. Marcia Clark is deciding. So it's down to Marcia Clark and Chris Darden. They're basically the two attorneys left trying to figure out who's going to be responsible for questioning which witnesses. So I'll give this part. I'll take the dog bark witnesses and the cops at the crime scene. That left me. I looked around the room and realized how white they looked. All these white people and me. How would that look to the homies in South Central? One brother surrounded by all this whiteness, sticking out like a scratch on a new Mercedes. Woo-wee. Does somebody talk about metaphors? Is that talked about on the Context of White Supremacy, to be mindful of the metaphors? Let me give that again. So it is one brother surrounded by all this whiteness, sticking out like a scratch on a new Mercedes. Damn, that's in the text. I thought, I really am going to pay hell for this. Chris, you have Furman and Van Adder. Damn. We had talked about this, but to hear it was like getting kicked. Those two were the most controversial witnesses in the case, the two who could turn the case, lose it for us. This wasn't putting witnesses on the stand, it was taking cattle to the butcher. Van Natter was going to be drilled by the defense for statements he made applying for a search warrant, and worse, there were reports Furman had gone through some psychological tests that uncovered deep racist sentiments. I have to pause right here. Jeffrey Toobin is leaving a lot out from the trial, so for people who are not like O.J. Simpson experts. So Detective Van Natter, white man, important for the blood evidence. This is the detective who, wait a minute, so when O.J. Simpson voluntarily gave a sample of his blood to the police, Detective Van Natter, you didn't take this blood and book it into evidence immediately, as is standard operating procedure with the LAPD. You took this blood, left the police station, went to the scene of the crime where they're still collecting blood evidence, and directly handed this to Detective Fung. Is that what happened? And he testifies, yes, that's what happened. And have you ever done such a thing before? No, I don't recall ever doing something like that before. That's when you start having questions about, could they have planted blood? Would they have had time to do so? Oh, Van Natter would have. So that's one, and then Furman's the other. Continuing. The other lawyers seemed to freeze, maybe expecting me to throw up or let loose with a wild string of expletives. They waited. Only Marcia didn't look up at me. She continued to stare at the pages in front of her. Yeah, I said, no problem. On the way out the door, I passed Dana Escobar, one of the brand new baby cake deputy DAs we had on the case. So, I asked him, what do you think of the way the witnesses were split? I think it's fucked up, he said. I feel sorry for you. One of the other clerks suggested that Marcia was dumping the worst witnesses and taking only the clean ones for herself. I didn't think so. I watched how hard she worked and knew she wouldn't back down from any witnesses. I drove home with one hand on my mouth and my brow rippled, lost in thought. Did Bill and Marcia think that hearing about a once racist cop from a black lawyer would somehow diffuse the awful beliefs? Had I insisted that my addition to this case had nothing to do with my race, but now I wondered if my colleagues thought they could sneak Furman and Van Natter through by giving them to the black guy. Did they think black jurors were so stupid? We've had 25 years of people telling us, yes, black jurors are so stupid. Even Jeffrey Toobin. Did they think black jurors were so stupid they would believe any witness I presented just because I was black too? It was ludicrous. Black jurors would do what any black person would do, what any person would do. They would evaluate the testimony, and if they didn't believe a witness, it wouldn't matter if Martin Luther King put him on the stand. The only thing that having me sneak these witnesses would accomplish is that the jury would decide I was being used and I would lose any credibility I had in front of them. If my fellow prosecutors wanted me to coddle these witnesses and were somehow trying to show the jury that I was vouching for them, they were beating at the wrong door. From the beginning, I had said that I wouldn't allow my race to be used in this case, and I still wouldn't. I would put the witnesses on because that is my job and my talent, but I would question them the way I thought best. There was no ethical dilemma here, no moral conundrum. I am a lawyer. My law school diploma wasn't a black Juris Doctorate. My bar card said nothing about being a black lawyer, just as Marcia's didn't say woman lawyer and Hank Goldberg's didn't say Jewish lawyer. I am a lawyer. I will stop there. Just making sure I'm not leaving. Yeah, I'll stop there. He does have some other goodies, but y'all can read Mr. Darden's book if you're super interested. There's one more section. I'm not going to read it now, but Marcia Clark, because she has, obviously, Chris Darden did not question Mark Furman. I will read a snippet from Marcia Clark's book to explain how that happened. The black guy did not question either of those witnesses, in fact, Van Adder or Mark Furman. The number 720-716-7300, the code 564943, pound, press star 61 if you would like to participate. We'll get to all the callers, even if it means we have to take a little extra time. Again, you all can let me know if it's, I do not want to hear what is in any of these other people's books. Shut up. We called in. It's OJ Day and we want to talk. Let me know and I will, desist from all that. But one, Jeffrey Toobin is lying a lot. So I feel like I have to try to, compensate for that. And then two, I feel like it gives more context because there's so many rich sources for this subject matter that hopefully it'll make it, more constructive, more informative to have other sources. Folks who dialed in with a hand up. Oh, and the email, untiljustice@gmail.com. Untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll read your commentary as well if you have thoughts to share. Folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. Proceed.
May I be heard?
Red in Ohio. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. Hello, everyone. I definitely appreciate you reading the excerpts. I'm glad you read the excerpt from In Contempt, Chris Darden's book. I did start that today, which I'm surprised how short it is. But when Furman had mentioned that in his book, like, as if Darden was just a black lawyer, and then, Darden said he completely contradicted that. I thought that was, it definitely was helpful, brought additional insight. A couple of things from the reading. I thought that it was interesting how Rosa Lopez, she wasn't charged with perjury or anything, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what is defined as perjury, because if Toobin, and I guess I don't think that Toobin is all the way truthful as well. I agree with the late Johnnie Cochran. But if what he was saying was true about Rosa Lopez basically being contradicted instead of her lying, and then the person who's questioning her has to then restate the question or essentially get her to tell the truth, I'm surprised she wasn't charged with perjury. The other thing that I noticed was in the part about Marcia Clark, the little, I guess, her background or history or whatever. It said that her grandfather or her parents or grandparents, they migrated from Israel, but they don't necessarily label her as Jewish, even though she speaks Hebrew, and during one of her many divorces, she had told her father in Hebrew that basically the guy wasn't right for her. I thought that was interesting. And then also her spending, I think it was at least $30,000 on her teeth. And I did want to mention, from Darden's book, it seems like the impression that I'm getting is that he is describing Marcia Clark as like this really headstrong woman, but she also dresses inappropriately. And I don't know if maybe you got that same impression. I know he mentioned a couple of times how short her skirts were, and that reminds me of the part in Toobin's book where they were given advice from that professor or ex-professor about what to wear, or how to question people, and she just disregarded it. I forgot the last thing. Because you basically read about Mark Furman's from his book, which I definitely thought was, I think out of all the books that I've read thus far, his is definitely one of the longer ones, but it's also one of the ones where some parts of it are actually comical, especially the chapter about all of the different Negroes, and he doesn't say Negroes, I'm saying that, but all the different black people that he's been around, or non-white people, or Jewish, and then actually that it just came back to me what I was thinking about in Toobin's book, how he was going over the situation where Furman had put a swastika on someone's locker because they had married a Jewish person, and Furman just denies that. It seems like there are a lot of these different incidents from other people's books where Furman is involved in some sort of either racist incident or anti-Semitic, and all he says is, oh, that didn't happen, and he doesn't really elaborate. Even in his book, he almost makes it seem as if Lance Ito's wife is out to get him. I could be mistaken. I'll mute my line. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Much obliged, Red in Ohio. Did I say Marcia Clark dressed inappropriately at the trial? Did I say that?
No, I'm not saying that you said that. Chris Darden, I remember in his book, he had mentioned how she would dress, how she would have on short skirts. There was one part in his book, he said that she was in a room with a bunch of men and how her skirt was short. I don't know if you remember that part.
Oh, okay.
He said that a couple times.
He does have a number of comments about skirt length, her skirt length in the book. Let's see. Yeah, I have to give one before I was just, the only thing that caught me was I thought she said that I said, I was like, whoa, did I say that? I generally try not to comment too much on people's clothing, but yes, that is true. He does, Christopher Darden does comment about her attire in the skirt. In fact, Johnnie Cochran does as well, and I think even F.D. Bailey, when he was on the program, was saying that she was kind of saddling up and flirting. Anyway, but that was mentioned as well. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in, I have to give a good skirt anecdote from Darden's book before we continue. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, if you have commentary to share, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Greetings, retired firefighter. Yes, sir.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings to everyone. Through this first report, and I may be mistaken, there was enough evidence on the behalf of the defense to on Mark Furman on his behavior, racist behavior, as well as his involvement in the murder trial, and also from the standpoint, well, mainly from the standpoint of him being one of the most prevalent enforcement officials on this case. That case should have been thrown out. I mean, I've heard of cases in the past where somebody like a Mark Furman, to the extent that he was and is similar to, whereas they would not only would they throw that particular trial away. I may be using the wrong terminology now because I'm not a legal expert, but other things that he was involved in as a law enforcement official, and if the individual was convicted, that they would like release that person. You know, I've seen that in the past with somebody with his behavior, with his long-standing behavior, and you know, the idea of the black male not asking enough questions about him, directly to him, for him not to have this understanding of this racist white male detective. I'm not surprised by it, of course, but because I've actually, you know, have seen something similar, not necessarily on a law enforcement, but you know, some victims of racist white supremacy, we all don't have a equal amount of understanding on things, whereas someone would think that a white person is practicing racism, and the other non-white person would actually be proud that that person asked him to go fishing with him. You know, so those are just my thoughts on the first reading, you know, especially the first part that I mentioned. And maybe somebody can help me out if that makes sense or not. I think it makes sense. Thank you.
It makes sense to me. There are at least 2 or 3 different points in this trial where I would have motioned for the charges to be dismissed. Like, Furman, you have this guy on tape saying, talking about planting evidence. And in my opinion, I mean, niggers, okay, yeah, he said that 50,000 times, right. Planting evidence. He is talking about planting evidence, fabricating, lying in court, all of that. I mean, I motion for the charges to be dismissed. This is the guy who hopped the fence for the warrant that they lied about. Like, that would have been another point. I motion for the charges to be dismissed. You lied on the search warrant. You have the evidence that you guys shouldn't even be admissible. Like, several points along the way here where I would have motioned for. I mean, that is very unlikely to happen in a double murder, but I would have at least wanted it on the record, like, the malfeasance in this is such, charges should be dismissed. Like, it shouldn't even be, you know, he got exonerated. Like, charges dropped, peace, and let's get to internal affairs or whatever it is for Mark Furman and the rest of these folks. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, you have comments here to share. Proceed. See if folks are getting their thoughts together.
Have you heard?
Thomas in New York. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to the callers. I remember the maid scandal vaguely. I wasn't aware that the Spanish accent was a point of contention, but I do remember feeling like it dragged on and it was a waste of time. I still don't get the purpose for it. The fact white people a white person actually went and found this lady and then lied and said he was engaged or married to her. It's just typical white people behavior. I mean, with that, man, you went and found this lady in El Salvador or wherever. I remember the white feminists on the TV media at the time being very upset at Johnnie Cochran about his comments geared toward Marsha Clark's family issues, and jumping to her defense. Jeff Toobin, he sounded like he wanted to be intimate with Mark Fuhrman because of his imposing size. He described him in such a way it sounded very sexual. He gave off the impression that O.J. Simpson was intimidated by Mark Fuhrman. And I don't know, I mean, O.J. played professional football against pretty big guys, in much better condition than Mark Fuhrman, both black and white. I don't think he was intimidated. I think black people are naturally intimidated by police, regardless of our size. A man riding around the campus in a Mercedes-Benz looking for girls, and he picks up Marsha Clark. He said she was beautiful. Man, almost sounded like a black person, but a bad joke. But man, I don't think that's a word I've ever heard her called was beautiful. She was not an attractive woman. Mark Fuhrman, keep him, if you could, man, I think that statement that was said was he's more racist than you can imagine. If a white person tells you that about another white person, you should know that's a very racist white person. And keep in mind his racist record at the beginning of the book, which they said it was buried in a tunnel or in some basement foul storage area. And Toobin had to go down and find some of this stuff about him. So his superiors was hiding a lot of his misconduct. It seems like from the book you just read, which I do like the greater context of it all, Christopher Darden still hasn't realized the only reason he was selected for that case was because of he was black. They have, that was the only reason. And Marsha Clark, white people with their traumatic childhoods, I find that to be common. I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Much obliged, Thomas in New York. Let's see. I'll pause and give one of the folks who wrote in, because we had several people who wrote in too. All right, first person, female victim of racism, black female. She says, I had no idea who O.J. Simpson was prior to his trial for murder, although I did recognize him from the commercials and films. That was me. The trial did not resonate with me, although the car chase has stuck in my brain. The racism and racial tension associated with the murder trial did register with me, but I didn't have a view on whether or not he was guilty. However, I guess the racist propaganda did its job, and I gradually came to believe he got away with murder. That's all of us. I decided to watch the opening statements of the trial online, but now cannot stop watching. That happened to us all. I'm up to late March. There is so much to learn about the case. Oh, she's where we are, because this is like, well, she's a little bit beyond us. Yeah, she's a little bit beyond us. There's so much to learn about the case. The difference between the book and how the trials are managed. I watched the first 10 minutes or so of the TV series and couldn't tolerate anymore. The demeaning way in which Chris Darden is depicted turned my stomach. He won an Emmy for that. And by the way, he towers over Johnnie Cochran. He's at least a foot taller. Jeffrey Toobin is a consummate liar. She has it in all caps. He is a wordsmith and highly deceptive, but there is also a bitchy drag queen quality to his narrative. I don't, what does that mean? That's not that is a unique one. I've never heard that. What does that mean if you're listening? Maybe we can get some more detail. What is that, yeah, give us some more detail. Break that down to us like we're 10 so I can grasp what that means. He clearly hates black people, for sure, and confident black men like Johnnie Cochran, who is the very definition of gravitas in particular. Jeffrey Toobin claims that Marsha Clark is competent but arrogant and speaks with precision. I beg to differ. She continuously makes mistakes and is more emotional than Chris Darden in her responses and behaviors. Oh yeah, you have to. She's kind of shrill. In fact, if you watch the trial, like, wow. Continuing. Please don't take my word for, wait a minute. I think I gotta. Please don't take my word for it or Jeffrey Toobin's. Watch for yourself. If you do not watch any other parts of the trial, in addition to watching the opening statements, I recommend the 7th of March, 1995. It's in several parts. She's an absolute mess, and Judge Ito is clearly frustrated with her incompetence. Her performance is particularly stunning on March 13th. I think that might be heading into like Furman. She actually gets lost in her own argument against F. Lee Bailey, when objecting to Mark Furman being called as a witness. Judge Ito has to correct her so that she can clearly articulate her point. I guess there was one person involved in the trial who benefited from affirmative action. No. Oh, jab to Marcia Clark. There's no other way to explain her being in that role. Marcia Clark is as responsible for the prosecution strategy as Chris Darden, and I do not believe that he would have been able to decide the focus on domestic violence without the agreement of his superiors. Yet, Jeff Toobin seems to only hold Chris Darden to blame. Incompetent black people. Jeff Toobin's depiction of Rosa Lopez is another example of him lying and being skilled with words. She did not claim to not understand English, but it is her second language, and she was in a courtroom where technical language and rules apply. Of course, she needed an interpreter, and there is a difference between understanding English and being able to speak it clearly, as Judge Ito pointed out during the trial. She did not drop out of school at the age of 9. Her parents needed her to work as the family was poor. She did not leave her job. She was fired. She was not supercilious. She was clearly intimidated by the prosecution lawyers and the trial process, and was being harassed by the media. I could go on. Can I just get one thing in before I finish? Rosa Lopez, if you watch the trial, one of the things that will stand out, what they leave out, what they do, this trial is so crazy. When Rosa Lopez came back to testify, the courtroom filled up with flowers. People sent in money because they felt so sympathetic to her. Like, it is crazy. Like, I have never seen a courtroom where there are just bouquets of flowers all over the place, and to not include that. And I mean, when does that happen in a trial where a witness is so beloved that we've got bouquet and we love you, Rosa, and we feel so sorry for job offers? And how does he not have a sentence about that in the book? Jeff Toobin. I agree on one of last week's callers that Chris Darden is seeking white validation and is white identified. His behavior is at times overly emotional, and he clearly has contempt for Johnnie Cochran. I believe he deluded himself into thinking that he could behave in the same uncontrolled way as Marcia Clark, racist suspect, but was mistaken. Finally, O.J. Simpson had every reason to object to the way Nicole Simpson was raising their children. She met Kato Kalin at a party where he asked her if he could move into her guest house, and she agreed. They then came to an agreement where he could reduce his rent payments by babysitting the children. She knew nothing about him. Suppose he was a pedophile? Jeffrey Epstein. No wonder O.J. wanted him out of the house and was angry about the situation. Skank, nigga, please. I'm done. No sympathy for Nicole Brown Simpson. What in the world? Much obliged for the commentary. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, if you have commentary, proceed. Not sure. Maybe folks are getting some of their thoughts together. While I'll I'll double check in a second. I'll just get in one more. I did have a little bit from Johnnie Cochran I was going to share today, just a tad. So we'll get a little bit of Johnnie Cochran, a little bit of Marsha Clark, and then we'll get ready to push off to our second audio. Johnnie Cochran writes his book, Journey to Justice. Though they later twisted themselves into knots trying to minimize Furman's centrality to their case, Simpson's prosecutors were never able to escape the fact that this man, with the dubious past and deceitful present, was, for all intents and purposes, present at the creation. Initially, in fact, the district attorney's office regarded that as a plus for its side. Furman, they believed, was a model witness. Handsome, intelligent, articulate, and well-dressed in suits from Carroll & Company, the same Beverly Hills clothier with whom O.J. purchased some of his business attire. Wonder of wonders, he even took the only completely legible crime scene notes any of us had ever seen. Lee Bailey, in fact, always suspected that those perfectly coherent and sequential notes with their meticulous block letters also were a fraud, composed at some point later rather than on the couch of Nicole Brown's condominium in the dark early morning hours of June 13, as Furman testified. We were never able to pin that down, but weeks before I joined O.J. Simpson's defense team, other people, many of them inside the district attorney's office, were already alarmed about the detective's role in the case. What Simpson's prosecutors did when that alarm was brought to their attention speaks volumes about their desperation to win at any cost. So he goes over pretty much everything that we heard about Purdy and this guy, I married a Jewish person and he put the stuff in my locker and blah, 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 Kathleen Bell, all that. So I'm skipping forward a little bit. The group agreed, therefore, that Coleman, a good friend of both Bill Hodgman's and Marsha Clark, ought to go on and tell them what the other deputy DAs had heard. In the first week of August 1994, Coleman went to Clark's office in the criminal courts building and put the whole matter before the Simpson prosecutors. She told them the stories about the locker and Nicole Simpson, naming Purdy, Arneson, and Maxwell as the sources. Marsha exploded. Bullshit, 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 she snarled at her stunned friend. Hodgman took another view. The stories, he said, should be checked out. Bill, Clark retorted, this is just more of the bullshit the defense is trying to plant in this case. Clark then turned on Coleman and said, I am damned sick and tired of other deputy DAs coming to me and trying to get involved in my case for their own self-aggrandizement. That is the essence of Marsha Clark right there. Shrill, uncouth, vile Marsha Clark right there. Stung and offended, Coleman stood up and said to Hodgman, Bill, you've been told. You can do what you want with it. With that, she stormed from Clark's office, never to return. Coleman, in fact, was so angry and perplexed, not only about the way Clark had treated her, but also about the situation's implications for the district attorney's office, that she discussed the issue with a number of colleagues over the next few days. From her standpoint, the matter seemed closed, but 6 months later, on February 13, 1995, Coleman, who was then on vacation, received a telephone call from Bill Hodgman, who had recovered from his illness and was functioning as case manager for the DA's Simpson team. Hodgman said that one of Gil Garcetti's assistants, Sandy Buticia, had received calls from some of the other deputies with whom Coleman had spoken about Furman. If Coleman did have information about the detective, Hodgman said matter-of-factly the office wanted her to speak with investigators from the LAPD's Internal Affairs Division. Coleman, understandably confused, reminded Hodgman of their earlier conversation with Clark. He professed not to recall it. Coleman then agreed to speak with the police investigators as soon as possible. In the meantime, Coleman phoned her friend Andy Purdy to warn him to expect a call from his department's Internal Affairs Division. Purdy, angry and frightened, told her he had already received one. "Don't you understand," he said, "that talking about this could cost me my job?" Purdy's agitation increased when Lucine told him that he had told others of the existence of his Furman log. Purdy kept a journal because he was so concerned about Furman's potential for planting evidence or other criminal or untoward behavior, so he tried to document everything in this log. Later that same evening, Purdy phoned Coleman and, in what she recalls was an acrimonious conclusion to their friendship, informed her that he not only would deny ever having told her of such a document, but also that he had destroyed the only copy that very day. And he just goes on to talk about how they made no effort to seriously investigate these claims. We're going after O.J. We're sticking by Mr. Furman. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, do you all have comments or just listening?
Oh, hi. Hi, call listeners, and hi, the guest bus. I was just thinking that I didn't know that Caitlin was a babysitter. I didn't know that. And I also found it interesting that Christopher Darden related himself to a scratch on Mercedes-Benz, like he put himself in negative terms. And then Mark Furman's comment about seeing a black male with a white female, it just sounded like a Dr. Francis Cross Welsing moment. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Much obliged. Caller in Canada. Let's see. Other folks that we missed, comments they wanted to make sure they get in, just listening.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is B from Santa Rosa. Just one quick thing. I feel like Chris Darden is a fall guy. Does anybody feel like that? Like they knew they didn't have anything, and Marcia Clark was so horrible that they had to put this on someone else. That's just how I feel. That's it.
Toobin starts the book, branding him as incompetent. Why they lost the case. Marcia Clark is arrogant. Christopher Darden is incompetent. And this is repeated. You heard what Mark Furman wrote in his book, the segment that I read. And in fact, we have to wait till we get to the glove part. That's way down the road. But oh yeah, man. It will come up repeatedly. Blame Chris Darden. It's Chris Darden's fault. It's Chris Darden. Incompetent, no count Chris Darden is why we lost this here thing. Let's see. Irie in Louisiana. Much obliged. Be in Santa Rosa. Irie in Louisiana. Did you have commentary?
Yes, I did, actually. Good evening, everybody, and hi, Beth. I'll make it fast. Some of the stuff I've heard about Mark Furman from this book, the interviews you've conducted, and I don't know, I'm starting to think maybe at first I was like, well, did he do it? But I don't want to say that, but I definitely think he knows who did it. I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution knew as well. This is really some high-level injustice that I'm hearing about, and I really think Mark Furman knows who did it, and I want to even maybe even ponder on him being a part of the situation, the Oath Keeper situation. I think one of the people you interviewed mentioned that, and then there was a couple years ago somebody was talking about something, and Bill Cosby's son was brought up about how he was killed by a white supremacist that was a part of the Oath Keepers or the Oath whatever white supremacist group that basically declared that they were going to kill non-white people and white people that engaged in tragic arrangements. So, I mean, like I said I'd make it short, but there's that. And I'll just continue to listen. Thank you. I'm in the line.
Much obliged, Irie. Let's see. We had one of our other folks who wrote in, different investor. He wrote, Chapter 16, I can't be here, Your Honor. Marcia developed bulimia, married a cheating professional backgammon player, married a Scientologist, occult, 1 month after divorcing, divorced her second husband for cryptic reasons, told her parents she never wanted to speak to them for cryptic reasons, estranging them from both her and their grandchildren. I find details regarding Marcia Clark's history much more disturbing than OJ's. And she's quit her job as a prosecutor to basically write murder mysteries. That's core white supremacy right there. Number 2, the real loser in the Lopez episode was Lance Ito. The handling of Lopez's testimony represented an appalling piece of judicial mismanagement. It seems like Marcia Clark shares some responsibility for how the Lopez testimony was given. Chapter 17. In the past 10 years, Mr. Furman. Number 1, since Furman did not know whether O.J. Simpson was even in the United States at the time of the murders, it was preposterous enough to suggest that he would take a bloody glove, use the glove as a paintbrush in the age of AIDS, renders the suggestion absurd. It is also plausible that Furman saw an opportunity and took it with the knowledge that the planted glove could just turn up missing if O.J. had an alibi. Moreover, since when do psychopaths like Furman worry about safe practices? That one is important. I think we will get a little further along in that one in the text. I'll pause there for chapter 17. I'll get in one other quick segment from Marcia Clark, and then we'll just get to audio segment 2. This is important because this explains how Marcia Clark ended up questioning Mark Furman as opposed to Christopher Darden. So this is from Marcia Clark's book, Without a Doubt. So the first portion, and this is important because she said, or Furman says that, Toobin in his book says that they didn't spend enough time preparing Mark Furman. They just hung out with him for like 30 minutes, eating sandwiches or what have you. That's not reflected in anybody else's book. Marcia Clark said, you already heard from Darden, him going in and talking and grilling, blah, blah, blah. Marcia Clark's book. Mark was clearly the object of a witch hunt, but I felt that we were spending entirely too many hours mollycoddling one witness. Mark Furman just wasn't that important. He found a single piece of evidence in a case that involved dozens of equally inculpatory findings. He had nothing at all to do with the blood at Bundy, the blood in the Bronco, the hair and fibers on Ron Goldman, and on the knit cap, the blood and fibers on Simpson's socks. Under normal circumstances, any one of these would have been enough to nail a defendant, especially a black one. Absolutely. Let's see. I'm skipping forward a bit. Okay. The N-word ruling hung around our necks like an 800-pound albatross. We should have been able to have Mark Furman testify to the very limited area of the case of which he had knowledge. Now, by putting him on the stand, we risked provoking a riot in the jury box. Really? So why didn't we just refuse to call Furman as a witness? Simple. Leaving him out would have been worse. What would have happened if we hadn't called him? It's not as if he'd have disappeared from the case. The defense would have asked every witness at every opportunity why Mark Furman wasn't at this trial. Is he beyond subpoena power? Is he refusing to testify? No. I see. Net result, we looked like we were hiding him. Why would we do that? Because we had something to hide. And then This theme would be sure to reach its crescendo during closing arguments where the law explicitly permits either side to comment on the failure of the other to call a logical witness. The defense would have blown us away. And she goes on to talk about how they were taunted. The defense attorneys had told them this explicitly: if you don't call Furman, we're going to do so, and we're going to do so and label him a hostile witness, which does happen to one of the witnesses in this trial, which means they could be even more aggressive with questioning him. So this had, yeah, you can hear all this. They had already said this is going to happen. Furman is going to testify. And in fact, Johnnie Cochran, during his opening statements, he had already pointed out the prosecution gave their opening statement. They talked for hours. Didn't even mention the person who found the glove. Why is it? He had already started with that, saying, oh, you're not going to come in here and act like Furman was a minor player in all this. No way. So she continues. She talks about how many black people thought Furman wasn't racist. Larry King is mentioned many times. He just passed away a couple days ago. I think that is so, I don't know, our timing, but for him to pass away in the middle while we're reading all this. Okay, so she goes. All right, here we go. So Christopher Darden had been questioning Mark Furman downstairs, apparently aggressively. Have you said nigger before? Blah, 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 all of this. So Marsha Clark finds out about this public kind of aggressive grilling of Mark Furman. So she says, what the fuck is going on down there? I demand it. They were firing questions at him, and he denied using racial slurs, Allen reported. I don't know if Chris expected this setup would get him to admit it or what, but whatever he expected, Mark hasn't admitted to anything. Where are they now? I don't know, but it broke up a few minutes ago. I was so furious. This was so typical of Chris. He loved to be the center of attention. He'd never do anything quietly if he could turn it into a sound and light show. That's the problem with the team approach to prosecution. You can't stay on top of what other members of the team are doing all the time. You have to give them a certain amount of autonomy. But if they're willful, they're likely to do ill-considered things. I kept my temper in check until the end of the day when Chris himself finally thought to pay me a visit. Quite a spectacle, I drawled sarcastically. Who's writing the screenplay? He came back defensively. Hey, there wasn't any air conditioning in my office, so I got Terry to open up the grand jury room for us. There were people hanging around. They wanted to give us ideas. Finally, he turned. His previous bravado was gone. Look, Marcia, he said, I can't deal with that motherfucker. I don't think I can do him. You're dumping him on me now? I wailed. You know I'm buried. It was true. I had a ton of work to do with Cato, plus at least 2 more days worth of interviewing with Alan Park. I was still searching for a use of force expert to explain how one man could quickly dispatch 2 victims with a knife. I still haven't had that explained to me. And I hadn't even started on the hair and trace evidence. Chris shrugged. Let Hank do it. Hank's got his hands full with Dennis Fung. Oh my gosh. The only other alternative was a special prosecutor, but I dismissed that idea out of hand. It would send the wrong message to the jury. Well, I'm sorry, but I just can't do it. I leaned forward and rested my head on my hands. There was no way around it. I would have to take Mark. This would double my load over the next 2 weeks. Chris had not done much actual prep work with Furman, which meant I would have to organize his testimony from scratch. I'd have to weave in all the areas, the reasons why he wouldn't have planted evidence, but if I spent too much time talking about how he'd done nothing wrong, we'd look defensive, spend too little, and we'd leave holes for the defense to fill with sinister fantasies. It would be yet another tightrope to walk. Damn. I only wish Chris had dumped him earlier. Chris, I lifted my head, but he was gone. Was I pissed? I sure was, for about an hour, and then my anger softened. Chris was under pressure too. Some of it I could only guess at. I reminded myself that home for him was a black working class community where the prevailing sentiment was that O.J. Simpson had been framed. Chris had to worry about whether his best friends considered him an Uncle Tom. He'd been spat on. He'd been flipped off. Every day of the week, he had to walk out of his door prepared to take it on the chin. And he goes on to talk about more incidents like that and blah, blah, blah. So she's switching. Just giving one more bit. Okay. So you've never said nigger, she's asking Mark Furman. He says, no, never said it. I found it hard to believe that Mark had never uttered that word. Not after what I'd seen in the disability file. I did believe that he never said it to an African American face to face. But never? Not over a beer? Not to his buddies? Not in private? That seemed unlikely to me. Could I get him to admit it? Judging from Chris's experience with him, probably not. Perhaps I could get him to soften his denial to, I don't remember. But a witness can be pushed only so far. A prosecutor is in a tough position when she doesn't fully believe her own witness. As I girded up for the encounter with Mark Furman, I made a pact with myself. If I couldn't shake him off his denial about the N-word, then I had an obligation to tell the jury that I had doubts about it. But I'd contrast it with that part of the testimony I was perfectly certain of, that he didn't plant evidence. Let's see. All right, so I'm skipping forward. Last little part here. So she's with Furman and his attorney. Mark takes a break. His attorney's name is Higby. So she says, during a break, Mark went to the hall to stretch. I took the opportunity to broach the race question with Higby, particularly Furman's insistence that he had never uttered the N-word in the past. It would really help if we could soften that denial a little, I told him. Is there anything we can do about it? Higby thought for a moment. If you want my advice, just leave it alone, he finally said. The more you push it, the worse he'll get. But don't you agree it would be better to front the issue, take it on first, and soften it with some kind of admission? All you'll do is alienate him, Higby warned. Then he'll take the stand in a hostile frame of mind. If you guys can just maintain a decent rapport, I'm sure it'll all go smoothly. When Mark returned, we spent another hour going through the questions I intended to weave through his redirect. And she goes through all that. For an officer in this position to have planted evidence would have been an act of insanity with no information about Simpson's whereabouts. For all he knew, Simpson could have had an airtight alibi for the time of the murders. Furman could have exposed himself to a major felony rap by monkeying with evidence. It just didn't make sense. Let's see. I think that will do it. Yes, she goes into her testimony that we heard, and yes, I think I can pause there. The only thing I'll say, I think Red in Ohio, she pointed out, Gavin DeBecker was a consultant for the prosecution in this case. We read his book, The Gift of Fear, and he has pretty significant chunks of the book talking. He calls Johnny Cochran and company the scheme team, and talking about OJ as a batterer, and of course he did this. Of course he killed her. It was a time bomb, whole pattern of the way abusers and people who go out and engage in these type of behaviors. I had to go back. I was stunned. What was I thinking when we read that? Was I thinking, yep, OJ did it? Anyway, that's one. The other one, the FX series, when they show the testimony of Rosa Lopez, they do not have her with an interpreter. It's like she's some sassy, foul-mouthed, I won't say foul-mouthed, but some sassy Latina female up here, sassing the prosecutors and all of that. And they leave out, and Toobin didn't even include it. One of the most important things, we talked about it with Patrick McKenna when he was on the program. Rosa Lopez said, hey, I heard voices that evening of the murders, perhaps after O.J. Simpson was gone. Who did she hear outside talking? She also testified, hey, Mark Furman came and talked to me the next day. What did you hear? Patrick McKenna was here, and he said, hey, I think it's very possible Mark Furman could have easily driven from the murder location at Bundy to Mr. Simpson's property, planted evidence, whatever else he wanted to do with a partner, with someone else. They could have heard him talking. He could have been on the phone. That's what she could have heard. And then he leaves, and then they come back later on to find the incriminating evidence. But he conveniently leaves all of that out. I think that is way more important than she saw the vehicle, she didn't see it, Mr. Johnny and all this other nonsense. Mark Furman. Did Mark Furman come back and talk to them? Are there notes for this interview? Super. I'm sure I had other notes, but want to just go ahead and get to the audio segment. See if I see one thing I had to get in. I think I'll wait. There's nothing I can pick out immediately that I'd say I need to get in right now. I feel like I read so much from all the other ports. The drinking, I guess that'll be one I get in. There are probably lots of things I can talk about. The drinking, anybody else, because she talks about that in the book, Darden talks about that. Anybody else, they might be, is this person an alcoholic? All this drinking on the job and actually storing bottles of liquor in the office? Isn't that alcoholic behavior? Sobriety would be best. We'll get to audio segment 2. If you didn't get to share, make a note. We should have ample time once we get through the second audio segment. It will be short. The run of his life. The People vs. O.J. Simpson. Jeffrey Toobin, audio segment number 2.
In court, Clark took Furman briefly through his background and then had him tell the jury about the time he responded to a domestic violence call at Simpson's home in 1985. When O.J. shattered a Mercedes-Benz window with a baseball bat. Then she moved to a new topic. Now, back in 1985 and 1986, sir, can you tell us whether you knew someone or met someone by the name of Kathleen Bell? Yes, I can tell you, Furman said evenly. I did not. Clark displayed Bell's original letter to Cochran on the overhead projector. The jurors had the opportunity to study the precise, awful words that Bell said Furman had uttered. That, among other things, Furman wanted all niggers gathered together and killed. It was one thing for Furman to issue a general denial, but Clark pushed these ugly sentiments right in the juror's face. This gesture was a measure of her confidence in her witness. Clark then established that Furman had been instructed to watch, what else, Larry King Live when Bell had appeared on the program about a month earlier. Did you recognize her? Clark asked. No, I did not. Clark continued. Did the conversation Kathleen Bell describes in this letter occur? No, it did not. This entire exchange was little short of madness on Clark's part. Bell was a credible witness. She had no axe to grind with the defense or the prosecution. Indeed, as she had told Larry King, she thought Simpson was guilty. More important, Clark knew that the defense could corroborate Bell's story with people she had told of Furman's comments at the time he had made them. The psychiatric records established that at least at one time Furman had claimed to harbor similar sentiments. Clark thus had to know that Kathleen Bell was almost certainly telling the truth. Yet still, Clark went with her gut, and Furman. The remainder of her direct examination was uneventful, underlining how minor a role Furman had played in the overall investigation. As Clark intended, Furman's testimony mostly repeated what the jurors had already heard from Lang and the officers who discovered the bodies. Ultimately, a half-dozen police officers made the same point. There was only one glove at the murder scene on Bundy Drive. With Furman, the idea was to show correctly that there never was a second glove to move to Rockingham, and furthermore, that even if he had wanted to, Furman never had the opportunity to move or plant any evidence. Clark also had the opportunity to finish the week with a flourish. Furman testified that while he was examining the Bronco on the sidewalk outside Simpson's house, he saw through a window a large, heavy-duty plastic bag and a shovel. With great ceremony, Clark presented Furman with a package wrapped in brown paper and police evidence tape. She asked Furman to unseal it, and he ripped the bag open and described what he saw. It appears to be a bag that's approximately 3 foot by 4 or 5 feet, Furman said. And is that the plastic that you recall seeing in the rear cargo area? Clark asked. Yes, it is. Furman held it up. No one needed to point out that it looked like a human being could fit right inside. A sinister image for the jurors to savor all weekend long. Over that weekend, thanks to the televised broadcast of the trial, Bronco owners arose. They made telephone calls to the prosecution, the defense, even to the judge. Clark's demonstration had suggested quite a bit more than the facts allowed. She had to begin the following week with a rather important and sheepish clarification. Now, that plastic, Clark said, do you happen to know whether it belongs in a Bronco or anything about it? Well, now I do, Furman replied. And what is that? The spare tire bag, standard equipment that comes with all Ford Broncos. And O.J. generally used the shovel as a pooper scooper for his dog. On that anticlimactic note, Clark turned over Mark Furman to F. Lee Bailey. Good cross-examination, Bailey once wrote, suffers at the hands of public misunderstanding. This achieves serious proportions because it is the public that fills our jury boxes. Too many jurors are waiting for Perry Mason. They expect the lawyer to bring the witness to the point where he cries out that the defendant is innocent, that he's the one who killed the go-go dancer. Well, it happens on television. There was just such a public expectation when Bailey rose to cross-examine Furman. But it was largely Bailey's own fault. He was so hungry for the spotlight and so embarrassed by his meager role to date in the trial that he held a series of press conferences in the courthouse lobby during Furman's direct examination to announce how much he was looking forward to cross-examination. Any lawyer in his right mind who would not be looking forward to cross-examining Mark Furman is an idiot, Bailey said, adding that he thought Furman was comparable to Hitler. Bailey built expectations so high that even Perry Mason himself couldn't have matched them. In a display of brooding courtroom machismo, Bailey had not objected a single time during Clark's direct examination, preferring instead to smirk silently as Furman told his story. But when his turn came, Bailey rushed to the podium in a burst of manic energy. He bounced on the balls of his feet as he asked questions. He began by driving home Clark's folly with the plastic sheet. After 9 months of investigation, you discovered on Saturday that this important piece of evidence was perfectly innocuous? Is that right? Clark objected, but the point was made. Bailey, however, was so pumped with adrenaline that he couldn't focus on any subject for more than a few moments. He talked about Furman's educational background, a high school dropout. Furman later received an equivalency degree. And then the lawyer jumped to the domestic violence incident at the Rockingham house in 1985. Bailey returned to Furman's activities on the night of the murder, and then he was off to the Marine recruiting station where Kathleen Bell used to visit. As Bailey meandered on, Furman grew confident enough to venture a little joke. Asked about Bell, the detective said, "The name Bell does not ring a bell." Bailey grew frustrated, and by the end of the day, he was ready for a desperate lunge. "Did you wipe a glove in the Bronco, Detective Furman?" This surprised the witness, since Furman did not know whether O.J. Simpson was even in the United States at the time of the murders. It was preposterous enough to suggest that he would take a bloody glove to plant at his house. But the idea that Furman, or anyone for that matter, would use the glove as a sort of paintbrush to spread incriminating evidence Well, it was actually kind of amusing. In the age of AIDS, the health risks alone to the glove planter would seem to render the suggestion absurd. But there was an insidious cleverness to Bailey's conjecture. If Furman had wiped the glove in the Bronco, it would explain how Goldman's blood wound up there. In fact, after the trial, several jurors mentioned this as a possibility. Furman gave a small smile, a faint chuckle of perverse admiration, but all he said was, "No." "You did not?" Bailey asked again. "No." Bailey made no progress that day in budging Furman from his story about his activities on the night of the murders. Indeed, he never would. So the following morning, Bailey sought greener pastures, Furman's racial views. In a pretrial ruling, Judge Ito had held that the defense could question Furman about his alleged statements to Kathleen Bell, but not his comments to the psychiatrists in his disability case. Those remarks, Ito ruled, were too remote in time to be relevant. On the morning of March 14th, however, Bailey asked Ito to allow him to cross-examine Furman about additional examples of his hostility to blacks. Bailey was willing to plumb the most obscure corners of Furman's life to shift the focus away from the bloody corpses at Bundy. Using Kathleen Bell as his wedge, Bailey sought to turn the Simpson trial into an examination of the social life at a Marine recruiting station 10 years earlier. Bailey wanted to ask about a statement that Furman allegedly made in the presence of Andrea Terry, a friend of Kathleen Bell's, at a bar in Redondo Beach. Terry said Furman had asserted that for a black man and a white woman to be together was a crime against nature. According to Bailey, another witness, a former Marine named Maximo Cordoba would testify that at the recruiting station, Furman had called him a nigger. Clark couldn't refute the Terry remark, and Ito let Bailey ask about it. But the prosecutor professed amazement at the Cordoba request. "We have interviewed Max Cordoba a long time ago," Clark said. "He never made such a statement, and he never alleged that Mark Furman ever made such a statement." Bailey loved twitting Clark, and he spoke in a near shout when he rose to refute her. Cordoba, Bailey vowed, would indeed say that Furman had called him a nigger. "Your Honor," Bailey said, gravely, "I have spoken with him on the phone personally, Marine to Marine. I haven't the slightest doubt that he will march up to that witness stand and tell the world what Furman called him on no provocation whatsoever." In light of this disagreement about what Cordoba would say, Ito ruled that Bailey could ask Furman about it only after the prosecution had had a chance to interview Cordoba again. Another fruitless day of cross-examination followed. Bailey tried to impeach Furman with his testimony from the preliminary hearing. At one point in that testimony, Furman had appeared to refer to more than one glove at the murder scene, using the plural them. But Furman easily turned aside this line of questioning, pointing out that he was referring to the glove and cap as them. Bailey asked about Bell's friend, Andrea Terry, whom the height-obsessed Bailey referred to as attractive but tall. Furman claimed never to have met her, but she's over 6 feet high. Still, Furman claimed no memory, and still Bailey made no progress. That night, March 14th, the NBC program Dateline broadcast an interview with Max Cordoba, in which the ex-Marine asserted that Furman had called him a nigger 10 years ago. It was all so ludicrously distant from the issues at hand, like a situation comedy playing on another channel. Max and the wacky crew of a beachfront Marine recruiting station meet the flirty real estate agent from upstairs, Kathleen, who tries to fix up the handsome cop, Mark, with her excessively tall friend, Andrea. Bailey even wanted the man who ran the ladies' wear shop next door to testify. Curiously, Cordoba also asserted on Dateline that he had never spoken to Bailey, Marine to Marine or otherwise. Clark played that excerpt from the broadcast the first thing the next morning in court. Bailey was even more red-faced than usual. furious. He said that he had spoken to Cordoba. He just hadn't discussed the facts of the case with him. Bailey had left that to Pat McKenna. In a phone call late the previous night, Bailey said Cordoba had acknowledged to him that he had been mistaken on Dateline. Now it was Clark who had the spring in her step when she took to the podium. She wasn't buying Bailey's subtle distinctions. "This is the kind of nonsense that gives lawyers a bad name, Your Honor," she said. He was intending to convey to the court that he had personal knowledge of what this man said because this man said it to him personally. And here Clark puffed up her chest and parodied Bailey, Marine to Marine. And now he is standing up and hair-splitting with us. Bailey looked as if he might expire right there in the courtroom. His hands shaking, his face a map of tiny blood vessels. He kept trying to edge Clark off the podium. Clark noticed and didn't give an inch. She pointedly turned her back on Bailey and told Ito, "Mr. Bailey, you can see how agitated he is, has been caught in a lie. And you know something? Not in this case. You don't get away with that. There are just too many people watching." Clark started to play more from Dateline, and Bailey stood up with his hand on the podium. "I object to that, Your Honor," he said, "and I ask that you put a stop to it." Her face inches from his, Clark chastised Bailey as if he were a naughty child. "Excuse me, Mr. Bailey. Stand up and speak when it is your turn." Bailey looked like he might take a swing at her, but he restrained himself, and this confrontation, like so many during the trial, burned itself out without a clear resolution. Bailey had one more request before he resumed his cross-examination. He wanted to use a brown leather glove, which he had placed in a Ziploc bag, in questioning Furman. Detectives frequently, as we have seen in this case, collect evidence in plastic bags, Bailey explained. Marines tend to carry things in their socks, the same way some detectives carry an ankle holster for a backup weapon. This package could easily have been kept in a man's sock, short or tall. I think it fair to ask Detective Furman if it would have been possible for him to put a glove in a plastic bag to which he had access and to stick it in his sock and to later pull it out and dispose of the plastic bag. This speculation, outside the presence of the jury, was as close as the defense ever came to articulating a theory for how Furman might have transported a second glove from Bundy to Rockingham. Clark again was outraged by this suggestion, which had not a shred of evidentiary support. "With respect to this plastic bag, this is ridiculous," she said. "There is no connection to this case. A leather glove of a different size, a different color, a different make, a different style, that has no relevance to this case either. This has no part in any search for the truth. This is a fantasy woven by the defense for which there is no evidentiary basis, no logical or factual connection to this case." Rising from his torpor, Ito asked to examine the glove Bailey proposed to use, then handed it back to Clark. "Let me ask you this," the judge said. "What is the glove size that is on the glove that was recovered at Bundy?" "Extra large," said Clark. "The glove there is a Brooks Brothers size small," Ito observed. "Right," said Clark. "They are out of extra large," Bailey interjected. Pat McKenna had done the shopping. "Not only that," Clark continued, "but the glove in issue is an heiress. It is not a Brooks Brothers. I can't even tell if it's a man's or woman's glove." Clark fondled the glove for a moment in silence. Then she said, "Size small. I guess it is Mr. Bailey's." There was a slight pause as everyone in the courtroom registered that Marcia Clark was referring to the folklore about the inferences to be drawn from the dimensions of a man's hand. At one level, Clark's comment was a pretty funny line, but it was a nadir of sorts, too, a symbol of just how out of control Ito had allowed the proceedings to get. The judge said nothing, though he did slip his own hands under his desk when Clark made her quip. Bailey didn't pick up on what Clark had implied until a few moments later. Then, out of the blue, he held up his right hand for the court and the camera to see. "Let me state very clearly, and I should point out," Bailey said, "that if Miss Clark thinks that hand and this glove would ever work together, her eyesight is as bad as her memory." This is the kind of courtroom it was, one where there was not just a stray comment, but actual repartee about the size of F. Lee Bailey's penis.
Context of White Supremacy. So we are actually not even finishing all of chapter 17. We're stopping right there. We included so much extra commentary and everything, so we'll continue with Mark Furman's testimony next week as we continue to move through the book. I think the person who wrote in, who talked about watching the trial, it's so different from the book, Toobin is leaving out so much. Like they, where we are in the trial, they totally skipped over. There was a visit to O.J. Simpson's house that was kind of significant. You know, they're out in the town. They go to the Mezzaluna restaurant. They go to Nicole Brown Simpson's residence where the murders happened. They go to O.J.'s place. They can see the air conditioner and all that. And they make a big to-do because the pictures and things have been changed to some degree at O.J. Simpson's house. They're like, man, you took down pictures of his, you know, naked white women and white golf buddies and, you know, put kente cloth and that type of thing up, which is true. They did do some of that. But I mean, much like Toobin didn't include in the book, that doesn't even happen at most trials. They do not take field trips so that you can go see where the murder happened. Just the whole kind of unusual, drama-filled nature of this. But there are lots of things that are being skipped over as we go. One of them, I'm just including this, and I mean, who knows? We have a ways to go. The gloves and the Furman tapes, we got a way to go before we get to the end of the book. But Toobin included like extra information about Marcia Clark and her whole divorce proceedings and trying to be a working mom and all of that, right? What she's going through. Now, maybe he will do this with Chris Darden as well. I don't know. I think Red in Ohio, she's actually finished this book, so she can, maybe he does include this. I don't know. But thus far, he hasn't said a word about some of the things that Chris Darden is going through while this trial is happening, in addition to being called an Uncle Tom and a sellout. Chris Darden's book, In Contempt, he writes, O.J. prosecutor's secret heartache. O.J. prosecutor Chris Darden has a secret heartbreak. The older brother he loves is a thief and a drug addict. The March 1 National Enquirer carried a thumb-sized photograph of my parents' house, a picture of me, and a horrible snapshot of a skeletal Michael, all drawn cheeks and hollow eyes, trapped in a living hell of drugs and despair. It had been several days since I'd seen Michael, and now in this picture I could see death in his eyes. I guess the tabloid photographer could see it too. The reporters had begun going to my parents' house that February, trying to get a story out of them. Sometimes they showed up with photographers hiding at the base of the stairs. They had been doing the same thing to me, rooting through my garbage can, following me home, taking photographs of women they suspected I dated. Ignore them, I advised my parents. Hang up the phone if they call, and don't even stop to tell them you don't want to talk. So the reporters went to my parents' neighbors, and then they went to Michael's apartment. I'm sorry, Michael told me the day the story came out. It's my fault. I was going to call him as soon as I saw the story, but Michael called me first. He said he had refused to talk, but one reporter threatened to write a story about Mama and say that she fed him on the porch like a dog. Write anything you want about me, Michael said. He told the man, but please don't write that about my mother. And so Michael sat and talked with them, and to show their thanks, they destroyed him with their story. This is the report. While Chris made the heroic climb from ghetto streets to become a top Los Angeles prosecutor, his brother Michael sank into a life of drugs and despair. Michael has been convicted of burglary 5 times. He lives in a tiny, shabby apartment and sometimes eats in a soup kitchen. His own parents don't trust him enough to let him in their house. Who can blame them? Michael sadly told the Inquirer, "Drug people have a tendency to steal stuff, and I'm addicted to crack. I want to stop doing it, but I can't." End of report. The reporter kept harping on Michael's health, asking if he had AIDS, but Michael insisted that no, he had tuberculosis. "You're lying," the reporter said. "We can get your medical records." I'm just going to stop there. He talks, more about this is all in Christopher Darden's book, In Contempt. We can get your medical records. I don't know. Now, Mr. Toobin, maybe he will include some of this when we talk about how dumb and incompetent Christopher Darden is. Maybe not. 720-716-7300, the code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. This is so 90s. AIDS, crack, O.J. Simpson, so 1990s. Probably lots more as we Rodney King, 1990s. See, star 61 if you did not get to share at all. Make sure you get a hand up. Do not lollygag and wait till the end. We will make sure that we hear from everybody if you have commentary, but just don't wait until the last minute. All the folks who are with us, line should be open. Proceed.
I've heard.
Thomas in New York? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Marsha Clark and S.B. Bailey going back and forth in court, very unprofessional. She hit him with the classic small hands joke, shot. He counted by holding his hands up to the camera, and it almost, of course, coming from a woman, that's a low blow, but kind of reminded me of Trump and Marco Rubio in the 2016 debates, where he said, Trump has small hands and he held his hands up and nothing small about me, and just clowning, as you say. But just to point out, still at the trial, no motive, no intent. It's nothing that you would need to prove that someone committed a crime has been presented by this prosecution yet, and they wonder why they lost. I mute my line. Thank you.
Much obliged. Again, I think I know this sort of thing happens all the time to black people. Convicted, all kinds of crimes, suspicious evidence, no evidence. Not a big deal, generally speaking. Other folks have comments, thoughts they wanted to share. While they're getting your thoughts together, different person wrote in, I have a question for the host, Gus, that I would like him to address on the program if it's possible. My questions are, now that you've come to the realization O.J. is really not guilty of murdering Nicole and Ron, do you also find the whole thing to be depressing, between the case most likely never being solved, the poor treatment of the jurors, the whitewashing of Mark Fuhrman and what he was capable of, the mainstream media lies and misrepresentations about the trial, the utter destruction and humiliation of O.J.'s life, the fact that 99% of the public believes he's guilty and will never have their minds changed, all that Sidney and Justin Simpson must go through, etc.? I would say it's so much like to process, like it is very depressing. It absolutely, and I think I had asked before once I, started to realize, like, wow, I don't think O.J. Simpson did this. I think he is innocent. Like, not just a reasonable, like, no, I don't even think it's possible that he, like, the portion that I read from Marcia Clark's book, how would it be possible for one person to kill two people nearly simultaneously with just a knife? How would you do that? And then one of them is 20 years younger than you. And it's not like a you're 25 and a 5-year-old type thing. Like, you're almost 50. And this person is 20 years younger than you and fit. How would you do that? Once I started coming to that realization, like, man, this does not make sense at all. Like, I think they got me. I think I've been tricked all these years. It was stunning. And then, like, wow, I said that, like, is that the world that we live in? Like, O.J. Simpson has been unjustly persecuted for 25 years? Is that the world that we live in? Whew. That is very depressing. And then all the rest, we had talked before, Geronimo Pratt. There are lots of cases, unfortunately, where white people were more interested in practicing racism than prosecuting a crime, sometimes a murder, correctly. We would rather practice racism and blame this on a black person, even when we know this black person did not commit this crime. Geronimo Pratt. We know they didn't commit this crime. We got evidence that they did not commit this crime, that they could not have committed this crime. We are more interested in practicing racism than even prosecuting the guilty. It's tons of components. The lies. I watched the ESPN documentary. I have not seen the last segment, but I've seen the first 4. It is disgusting. As he said, the treatment of the jurors and black people in general, the flagrant dishonesty. Jeffrey Toobin is in the ESPN documentary, so I mean, that's all you need to know. Flagrant dishonesty in these projects, and these are award-winning films. They talked about the FX series, and the person who wrote in said she couldn't even watch more than 10 minutes of it. The depiction of Christopher Darden, where they don't make any mention, they do a lot. In the FX series, they spend a lot of time. Poor Marcia Clark, she had it so bad. Victim, sexist, toxic males making all these lewd comments about her, and Johnnie Cochran, you know, penalizing her for being a working mom. They play that so hard. No sympathy at all. Christopher Darden, victim of racism, his family, his brother, nothing. He's just pouting and emotional and incompetent. So it's very depressing, but it's also, you can learn a lot, unfortunately, about the system of white supremacy. That has been one thing. Wow, you can learn so much about the system of white supremacy, racism. In fact, this is a great illustration. We talk about non-white people being confused about racism, white supremacy. Like, even this case right here, like, I don't think most non-white people that I bump into, they are not like quasi-experts on the O.J. Simpson trial as it relates to racism, white supremacy. Like, that right there shows you the power of racist white supremacists. And some of it, Jeffrey Toobin, you put out books, you put out so-called documentaries, the FX series is better than the documentary. The FX series is more truthful in many ways than the so-called documentary. Like, that's how ridiculous and the intensity of the white supremacy propaganda around all this. But you can really learn a lot about how white people practice racism, how they practice deception with this. In some instances, it's just you keep saying the same lie. Jill Shively, they just keep wheeling her out. She was mentioned in Mark Furman's book. Oh yeah, O.J. Simpson almost ran me off the road, right after he killed those. I was terrified. Really, Jill Shively? And you just keep, even after she gets discredited, you just keep wheeling her out. 2016, 2020, we just wheel her out again. If folks have commentary that they want to make sure they get in, make sure you don't wait till the very, very end, because we're almost done. Any other folks' thoughts, observations that they wanted to share? Listener that wrote in, he had a second question. He said, do you think the truth about this case trial will ever be revealed in our lifetime? If you mean like who actually committed the crime, I seriously doubt it. I mean, it's been 25 years at this point. I don't know. I don't even know what that would mean at this point. I mean, even if, unless they had like video, I would think like, irrefutable proof. If somebody wanted, even Mr. Simpson, if somebody wanted to step forward and confess, the amount of irrefutable proof that would be needed, like, yes, I committed these crimes, or we committed these crimes, this is how we did it, this is the time, the why, all the, the details and blah, blah, blah. We got photographs of us doing it, video, everything that you need. We did it. No, I seriously doubt that that's going to happen. The perpetrators could be deceased at this point. I think F. Lee Bailey and some others, one of the theories is that the perpetrators, they were attempting to get Faye Resnick. They made an error. Once this was found out, they were killed. So in that instance, wouldn't be possible. I can't see somebody stepping forward to make a truthful confession at this point. So if that's what we mean, knowing the truth about it, seriously doubt it. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be lots more speculation and theories and things of that nature. I cannot imagine after 25 years anything. It would be great to get like some details, like more information about Mr. Goldman, Ronald Goldman, more information about him, about this case. That might be helpful, just to be able to get more data, but very doubtful that there'll be any sort of satisfactory closure. And I think this is one, you have a lot of white people. It's just O.J. Simpson did this. There is no, that's the closure. O.J. Simpson did it, and we'll just wait for him to die so we can, mock his grave and shoot at his tombstone and all the rest of it, and no count murder, and that's that. They have convinced with the ESPN documentary and books like what Toobin wrote and the like, it's very easy to manipulate. I can't stress that enough with this case. White people's ability to manipulate and confuse non-white people about events and things that took place, it is extraordinary. I think even Thomas in New York said that he knew people. I'm not one of those folks, but he knew people who at least they were diligent at one point. They did investigate this at some point and said, man, at minimum, this evidence is really suspicious. This is looking like, man, I have got enough reason to have reasonable doubt, if not thinking out and out, nah, he didn't do this, and you all are, trying to set up a black person here. That after time, you forget, you don't have that information, and they put out enough of those films and books like this and documentaries in quotes, and wow, I guess OJ did kill those people after. It is amazing. You can learn so much about the system of white supremacy racism just evaluating this case. Even you bring in Christopher Darden. You bring him in, and then you're going to try and set him up, give him all the bad witnesses and what have you. And then you still find a way to blame it. Oh, yeah, it's incompetent, no count Christopher Darden, who wasn't even a part of this case when it started. Remember, they had him with AC? Remember that? That was the other point I was going to bring up, too, with Rosa Lopez. Remember, they said Judge Ito thought about putting her in jail over the weekend to make sure that she didn't try to flee to El Salvador, to make sure that they got her testimony that Monday morning. Remember with Cato, back with the preliminary hearing, and he kept saying, I plead the fifth. I'm not going to talk. And he was going to talk to his attorney, and it was the same thing. Is he going to flee? We don't know. He's not cooperating. And it just said, oh, no. He's a great old boy. He's great. He wouldn't do anything. Come on. You'll be here, Mike. Remember that? There was no thought of putting old Cato in. Remember, because we said, man, if this had been AC, I think AC might have been in jail. We can see Rosa Lopez. almost could have been in jail. She didn't commit a crime. She didn't do anything. I thought there was some suspicion with Cato, like, hey, you know, at minimum, it seemed like he might have been under the influence, like some narcotics, something. Rosa Lopez did nothing criminally wrong, and it was, we might need to lock her up for a few days, make sure we get her testimony. Oh, and make sure I answer. Red in Ohio, she asked about perjury. I am not an expert in jurisprudence. My understanding of perjury as it relates to criminal trials, if you lie on the witness stand under oath, that may not necessarily be grounds for perjury. For it to be considered for perjury, it has to be relevant to the charges of the case. So just for example, if they were talking about food, Toobin was saying that they were talking about tamales, right? She says she loved tamales. Somehow they found out she's allergic to tamales. She's never had a tamale in her life. Okay, so if she lied about that, that's not really relevant to whether or not O.J. Simpson killed these people. So that probably would not be something that they would consider for perjury. I think whether or not she lied about the morning that she purchased her ticket, that's not really relevant to whether or not O.J. Simpson killed these people. Now, Mark Fuhrman lying on the stand about, have you ever said nigger? Some people say that's not really relevant to whether or not O.J. Simpson killed these people. Others take the opinion, myself would be in that group, if that might be a reason, part of the justification for fabrication of evidence, that is relevant to this case. So that would be how you weigh it. Many people lied on the stand, or many people, it would seem, may have deliberately lied during this trial under oath, including prosecutors. A number of prosecutors, as you heard, were even accused of not being truthful in the trial. I'm not even sure in terms of prosecutors how that works, if they can be, prosecuted for all that. But I know at least for witnesses, it would have to be relevant to the charges of the case. And even for perjury, there are degrees, as I understand it, and that is directly related to how closely is this your lie? How closely related is it to the matter at hand? And the more closely related, the harsher the penalties. That's my understanding. Again, I'm not an expert in jurisprudence. That's it. Folks satisfied? Did we miss anybody? Grant, we'll assume that we nabbed everybody. Didn't omit any questions. Let's see. Did I miss the other person who wrote in? Our other person who wrote in, Marcia Clark, was referring to the folklore about the inferences to be drawn from the dimensions of a man's hands. Actual repartee about the size of F. Lee Bailey's penis, tacky, trashy, or terroristic. Welsing moment for sure in the midst. And I mean, so much of this, I said, gets to the genital level and sexual intercourse, and particularly, between a white person and a non-white person, black male, white woman, lots of that. But when we resume next Thursday, it will be F. Lee Bailey. The cross-examination continues of Mark Fuhrman. Fast. You can go back, anybody listening, if you did not hear, we had F. Lee Bailey on the program just about 30 days ago. He talked about the cross-examination and more details on the trial. Fascinating. Go back, check that out. And Patrick J. McKenna, lots of, the folks that are very mentioned in the exact text. Hopefully we'll have more of the folks who've written about and studied on this case. We can get more of them to come and be guests on the program so we can get more details. But again, excellent case to study. There are so many books that you can read. You can have your little O.J. Simpson library. And again, you can talk to your offspring, family members, friends. This can be a great way to talk about dimensions of white supremacy, racism. You all can watch You all can watch some of the documentaries or the FX series, or you can talk about these books. There's so many different ways. If they already saw it, you can talk about it and watch and talk. You can talk over it if you've already seen it. You can watch and talk. And did you watch the trial? Have you read any of these books? Have you looked at the transcript? You can watch the actual trial. I can't emphasize that enough. There is no reason for lies to be sustained and perpetuated when a lot of this stuff can be confirmed or refuted immediately. We can go to YouTube in 5 minutes and just what day, what testimony, what witness do we need to find? We can watch this immediately and squash all of that. There's no reason for this to be rife with rumors and innuendo and lies about what happened. The transcript is available, all of it. The trial is available, all of it. Be a quasi-expert on the O.J. Simpson case. It will come up so frequently in so many different ways. Again, it can be a great tool to explain what white supremacy racism is, how it works with other non-white people. The total whitewashing, as the person who wrote in talked about, the whitewashing of Mark Fuhrman. That is how white supremacy racism worked. He was the only person, emphasize that, the only person who was convicted in connection with the O.J. Simpson or the O.J. Simpson criminal trial, 1995. Mark Fuhrman. And he gets to hang out on television and talk about George Floyd and write best-selling books, and woe is me, I was a victim in all this, and am definitely not racist. The wisdom of psychopaths. We will end there. Much obliged for folks tuning in. Hope it was worthy of your Thursday evening. We'll be here for Workplace Racism tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. Super important, especially no drinking on the job. I would say hunker down. Lots of danger out and about, the rona, race soldiers, lots of reasons to be safe when you travel out. If there are any folks being hostile and rowdy, no verbal confrontations, exit. We are not doing any sort of confronting folks. You don't know if this person is armed. You don't know if this person is with a whole cadre of people who are also armed and looking to do harm. Be very alert to all of that, because it seems like that is, some people are looking excited for that sort of opportunity right now. Safety should be a number one precaution. Real risk averse, we will continue to be probably for the rest of the year. Share that with folks that you care about as they go out. Just be alert and aware of your surroundings. If you are driving, you are buckled, driver or passenger, you are sober. If you are driving, you are not on the cell phone. Again, just doing the small things that we can to minimize contact with the Mark Fuhrmans of the known universe. Also, we need all of our attention. Make sure that, we're not in imminent danger. A riot is not to break out, Antifa or Mark Fuhrman. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.